Chapter 121 Clue. You sure came quickly. Caslin sighed in Hero Tavern's scullery and sized up the man and woman in front of him. So you are the most outstanding seeds from the tower from the recent batches, and you came here to help. Cohen Carabayan had already taken off his police uniform and donned a Northland robe made from thick skins which would keep him warm, but those golden strands of hair on his head were still as bright as ever. Miranda Arund had her snow boots on and wore a dark half-plate. Her shoulder-length black hair was tied in a ponytail behind her head. The mark of the flying falcon on her black glove had already disappeared without a trace, and no one could tell that she was the young lady of the Arund family. After they went through the strict training and trials from the Tower of Eradication, they knew how to better disguise and hide their identities. Field survival training would always be the mandatory class for the swordsmen and knights of Eradication. But their disguises seemed to have lost their effects on this old tavern owner. I don't understand. The old, white-haired Caslin frowned deeply. This is not some sort of game trail. Shao sent two nobles here, Young master and young lady. Cohen's expression froze. Where did we slip up? He lowered his head and gave his own attire a once-over. Stop looking. I'm talking about your posture and movements, you dumb boy, Caslin said coldly to his junior. Cohen turned towards Miranda with an astounded gaze. The latter had a deep frown on her face as she met Cohen's gaze squarely. Even if I am 6 kilometers away from you, I can still smell the scent of a field officer spreading out all over your body. Caslin shook his head. Look at that shock on your face. You look like a rabbit who's about to jump up and bite. You just came from Western Desert frontlines, right? Cohen looked at the old man in shock. How could this be? I'm just maintaining the standard level of vigilance. Based on Zedai's suggestion, he had already adjusted himself, and the symptoms of the battle abstinence syndrome could no longer be seen on him. Unless, Cohen looked at the old man solemnly, he is someone who was once like me, a being who lived through a battlefield. And he's the very terrifying type. Cohen remembered the aloof gazes from some of those in the suicide squad when he was in the desert. He could not help but feel a chill creep into his heart. Cohen looked at the old man in front of him and sent Miranda a glance. It was a pity that his ex-cohort ignored him. Unable to do anything about it, Cohen could only smile and say, Mr. Caslin, Master Shao gave us the task of chasing after the disaster sword. But his words were immediately and rudely interrupted by Caslin. And you, lassie, your mercenary disguise is very professional. You should be able to move about without a problem in places like Columbia. Caslin ignored Cohen and continued sizing up Miranda, then continued speaking in a stiff manner. But you must know that there aren't many mercenaries in Northland. The people here are strong-bodied and love to fight. There are plenty of things here where the men in the house could handle just by picking up their swords. Mercenaries can get no business here. Your disguise will stand out too much. Miranda's expression changed. In your temperament, perhaps only idiots will not be able to recognize that you're a noble, Lady Arund. Oh, well, forget it, Caslin sighed, at least you're much better than plenty of the young noble, young lady of the Arund family. When she heard this, Miranda opened her mouth wide in astonishment. How could this be? My status, how did he manage to see it? I clearly took off all things that could allow others to identify the White Eagle when I entered the border. The old man sitting on the chair placed his hands on his knees, then raised his brows in skepticism. I must say, do you really know what sort of being you are about to face? The descendants of a duke and a count, an Arund descendant, to boot. Disgust was written all over Caslin's face as he clicked his tongue. The young master and young lady of noble families. Quickly write a letter back. Ask Shao to send more people over. It would be best for them to be supreme class elites. Cohen frowned. This is bad. Our point of contact doesn't like us. What should we do? At that moment, the lady from the Arund family suddenly took a step forward and glared at Caslin with anger on her face. Listen up, old man, Lady Miranda Arund spoke with a hostile expression on her face. You do your job and we will perform our tasks properly. This is the most ideal situation. As for our abilities, we know what sort of dangers we are about to face, and we are not some pampered young master and young lady in our families. Miranda's face was stern as she enunciated each of her words clearly. Cohen is my colleague, and he awakened to the glory of the stars. I understand him. He spent many years on the Western Desert frontlines. He understands battle and the ways of war very well. He is an outstanding warrior and a military officer. When he is on the battlefield, he will not be any less useful than an old pair of bones who has not moved for decades, even if he is a supreme class elite, Lady Arund said flatly. Cohen looked at Miranda, at his colleague who refused to back down even an inch. My God, when was the last time she praised me? Could it be that when a woman is broken-hearted, her temper would improve? Caslin wore an expression as if he was amused while he stared at the girl before his eyes. An old pair of bones who has not moved for decades. Interesting, how energetic. If I was 30 years younger. And I have served under the Fortress Flower. I led Constellation's army to Cold Castle, to Lonely Old Tower, to Overwatch City, and traveled back and forth between the borders of two countries. I also led the army to fight against Lampard's men numerous times before. Miranda stared at Caslin with a sharp gaze. I know how to fight, old man. We are not recruits lacking experience. Of course, perhaps from the viewpoint of a veteran, only supreme-class elites like Teacher Chartier and Guru Zedai can handle this situation. But Mr. Caslin, while everyone else can reject our experiences and abilities because we are, respectively, the young master and young lady of our families, only you do not have the right to do so. Caslin narrowed his eyes. This is the first time I hear your name, Mr. Caslin. Miranda slowly placed her hand on the sword at her waist. It is not because you have a shocking reputation, but it is because of your family name, Caslin Lampod. Caslin raised his brows. As for Cohen, he was completely dumbstruck. Yes, all members of the Arun family must know the situation of our enemies' families like the back of our hands, the swordswoman said languidly with a low tone. So, Caslin narrowed his eyes again. Miranda stared intently at Caslin. So, if you have an opinion towards the name, Arund, because you are from the Lampod family, you can just say it to my face. Miranda's pupils were narrowed as she glared attentively at the old man to find all possible weaknesses on him. She gripped her sword hilt tightly and said in a chilly voice, "We can use our swords to settle our differences, old man." Caslin looked at Miranda's sword and uttered a disdainful snort. Of course, perhaps this is just a simple provocation, and you want to see our abilities with your own eyes. Miranda asked with some underlying meaning in her words. If you are, then let's hurry up and start. We'll finish it quickly, and then continue with our mission instead of waste our breath with an old geezer. Caslin stared at Miranda, his smile disappeared and the aloof, expressionless face returned. When he saw that conflict was about to erupt right in front of his eyes, Cohen became so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks. Miranda, should we? At that moment. Caslin let out a bark of laughter in anger and cut off Cohen's words once again. Caslin hit the table and stood up swiftly from his chair. Even if he was already in his 60s, his near 7-foot height and his muscles, which were practically not atrophied, still gave him an incredibly oppressive air. But Miranda's gaze remained as sharp as ever and did not move. She only bent her body slightly and adjusted herself into her fighting stance. All right, the test is over. Caslin suddenly let out a loud bark of laughter. You're interesting, lassie. When you're angry, you look like a leopardess. Miranda gritted her teeth. It's over, leopardess. This old man. Young Croce is right. With a sharp gaze, Caslin showed his yellowing teeth and said languidly, Miranda's observation skills are outstanding. When she runs into problems, she displays firm resolution. She will not procrastinate, but she is just a little too prideful. Miranda was stunned. Croce. Cohen placed his fist on his palm excitedly. So, uncle, you know Croce. What did she say about me? She said. Caslin did not mind that Cohen had changed from Mr. to uncle when addressing him. He dug around his memories for a while before he turned his head and put on a peculiar expression. Cohen Karabayan is not a bad person, but he is a thick-headed fool. That's all. Cohen was stupefied for a moment before he touched his head and smiled awkwardly. In his heart, he was howling. So my image is actually that bad. Caslin watched how Cohen reacted to the situation and chuckled. Boy, do your best, boy. Caslin laughed heartily and slapped Cohen's shoulder. Cohen's expression changed, but he gritted his teeth and maintained his posture so that he did not sway. When he saw that Cohen did not move even a single inch, Caslin praised him in his heart. You know, Caslin said in an unreserved manner, my wife also called me a thick-headed fool. Cohen was stunned for a full 3 seconds. Wife, so. Enough, Miranda frowned and interrupted them. Can we get straight to the point? Cohen no longer thought about Croce. He shrugged in resignation to indicate to Caslin. This is how she is. Hey, Caslin stopped smiling and his expression changed. Listen, I know why you were sent to handle the disaster sword. Caslin regarded Cohen with serious gaze. Boy, you were sent here for a reason. Shao told me that you had run into a disaster sword once, is that right? Cohen was momentarily stunned before he instinctively nodded. He lowered his head. Then he said with a solemn expression, in Constellation's capital, they were related to Blood Bottle Gang. As for the disaster sword I confronted in another area, Cohen remembered how they had met each other again in the Hall of Stars. He gritted his teeth and did not say more. Now is not the time. You did not tell me about this, Cohen. Miranda frowned and looked at her colleague. Cohen frowned and gritted his teeth slightly. He did not answer her. It's not that I didn't want to tell you. But, if I tell you about the disaster sword, then Raphael. Cohen's expression did not change, but he clenched his fist slightly. And you, lassie. Caslin turned his head around to look at Miranda. You were not dragged into the purgers without reason, right? Cohen's expression changed. He lifted his head and looked at the swordswoman, his colleague who shared a similar background with him, who had similar experiences as his, and who had known him for many years. Miranda gritted her teeth and did not say a word. Caslin did not say anything either. He only waited for her reply quietly. After a moment, Miranda spoke with great difficulty. This has to do with my father, the Guardian Duke of the Northern, the former guardian duke of the Northern Territory, Val Arund. When she said these words, the young lady of the Arund family's voice froze momentarily. Cohen watched her worriedly. That duke who betrayed the country, huh? But in Caslin's eyes, even though the neat-looking girl's voice was unsteady, she still gritted her teeth and enunciated her words slowly. During the past 4 or 5 years, I discovered that he was communicating with a strange swordsman from the north, and their power of eradication was extremely unusual. Miranda lifted her head and her expression was grim. I told Chartier about this. Cohen looked surprised. Look, this is the reason why you're here. You have come into contact with the disaster swords and even fought against them. You also know about their characteristics, Caslin said slowly. That's why you were brought into the Purgers. When he heard that familiar term, a serious expression appeared on Cohen's face. Uncle, you know about the Purgers too? He asked. Know about them, Caslin cracked up. Cohen stared at him with a strange expression. Caslin's expression gradually turned cold. A long time ago, Xiao and I created the Purgers. Cohen widened his eyes. As for Miranda, she stared at the old man in shock. Listen, the Purgers were formed a long time ago, said the old man unhurriedly, just like how the disaster swords began their activities a long time ago as well. A long time ago, Cohen repeated these words solemnly. He remembered the records about Blood Bottle Gang and the disaster swords during the past 100 years. Caslin nodded seriously. A long time ago, we were 2 young men who were crazy over sword skills and were curious about the power of eradication. We tried to understand the truth behind the disaster swords and put an end to the threat they brought. At that time, we were about your age, and we were far from supreme class. We were impulsive and lively. We did not care about the consequences, Caslin said faintly. Xiao and I worked hard, in every possible manner, but the results were not good. At that time, the disaster swords kept a much lower profile and were much more secretive with their actions. There were plenty of times when we would still be unable to find their tracks even after investigating them for several years. An expression of fond remembrance appeared on Caslin's face. Later on, I joined the White Blade Guards. As for Xiao, he became a scion, Caslin said slowly. The Purgers then stopped their operations. Until one day, Xiao told me that he was prepared to assemble the Purgers again. Why? Cohen asked in puzzlement. Why did he decide to assemble them again? Caslin cast him a profound gaze. Because the disaster swords have begun their operations again. Caslin's words were filled with an oppressive, imposing tone. Just 12 years ago. A fierce and wary look appeared in Caslin's eyes, looking as if he was a dangerous hunter who had fixed his eyes on a prey. He hissed these words through gritted teeth. And this time, they are much more active. They act in a much higher profile, are even more unscrupulous, more dangerous, and fatal. Cohen was struck dumb. 12 years ago, isn't that? He looked at his colleague. In his eyes, he saw Miranda clench her teeth, also shocked by this matter. But the pale look on her face was even more prominent. It was as if she had remembered some deplorable memories. Cohen frowned. Come with me. Caslin stood up with a stern face. I will bring you to meet Croce, as well as let you read the clues regarding the disaster swords. The old man turned around and led them away. There are quite a lot of people involved in this matter this time. It's not just the disaster swords and the Tower of Eradication. The Prince of Constellation is also involved. Caslin pushed open a door and spoke while leading the way. Wait, what did you say? Cohen asked in shock. Are you talking about the second prince who has left on a diplomatic mission to Extit, Thales Jadastar? Miranda frowned. That's right. When he said these words, Caslin smiled. That is an interesting child. He stopped here to rest not too long ago. Constellation's heir, what is his connection to the disaster swords? Cohen asked in grave tone. Didn't Xiao tell you? Caslin whipped his head around in surprise. Cohen shook his head. By his side, Miranda seemed to have remembered something, and her expression changed. Then, he heard Caslin speak slowly. The disaster sword tried to assassinate your prince before. During that instant, Cohen and Miranda were stunned. Several seconds later. The disaster sword, Cohen asked urgently, why? Why did they want to kill the Prince of Constellation and heir? I thought their targets were only us in the Tower of Eradication. Listen up, you don't understand the disaster sword, and neither do I. Caslin's tone changed. He stopped moving and turned around. But based on the experiences I have gained about them in the past. A grave expression appeared on Caslin's face. Their goal is definitely not something as simple as attacking the Tower of Eradication and replacing it. As for that prince, who knows? Perhaps this involves the Northland suzerains who want his life. Impossible, Miranda said in a level-headed manner. King Kessel used the throne as an oath and restricted the movements of all those who want to harm him. His Highness is very safe in Extit. No one would dare to harm him. Really now, Caslin laughed heartily. When his laughter disappeared, he cast a complicated gaze on the young adults before him. Your prince and your king's oath turned your prince into a precious, ancient alchemy ball. Once it's destroyed, it will explode and harm others, Caslin said flatly. True, in Northland, no one would dare to attack him, or at least they will not dare to have him explode in their hands. When he said these words, Caslin lowered his head, and his gaze dimmed. But they wish that he will explode in other people's hands. Ellipsis. Thales stared at Nicholas and Marquis Shiles in front of him and pondered over King Nuven's invitation, or rather, his request which was brought to him by these two people. A bad hunch rose in Thales' heart. Wait, based on what you said, does that mean that King Nuven has not yet found his enemy, Archduke Lampard's co-conspirator? See, this is the reason why we came to you. Marquis Shiles nodded slightly and put on a polite smile. Why must it be me? Thales said in a dismal tone, I'm just a 7-year-old child, I can't play such high-level games. You're not just a 7-year-old child, you're also a 7-year-old genius. Shiles added with a wink. Thales closed his eyes, feeling his head throb painfully. Hiya. Just as you said, Prince of Constellation, you are the one who should have received King Nuven's wrath, Nicholas said slowly. There was a slight, threatening tone in his words, but this is a chance for you to break free of the pain you should not have to suffer. Whether you agree or disagree to this depends on you, boy. Thales let out a long sigh. What do you know about Archduke Lampard's co-conspirator? The diplomat group's vice-diplomat, Poutre, asked with a grave expression. He had already realized the direction of how things would develop. We have a very clear goal, Poutre answered with a pale face. When you were still in Broken Dragon Fortress, Lampard once surrounded and attacked your diplomat group in an attempt to seize the fortress and lure the fortress defenders to attack. That's right, something like that happened. When he remembered Araka and his Fury Guards, Thales sucked in a deep breath. That is definitely not a happy memory. Nicholas continued speaking as he rode on his horse. Under the orders of a military spy, the Mystic Gun unit in Lampard's army tried to kill you, and based on the information we have and what the secret room has, we are almost certain that the person behind the military spy is our target. Thales remembered the attack from the Mystic Guns and stared at the snow-covered ground with a blank gaze. He shuddered at the thought of them. Poutre frowned. Based from what I know, Lampard is also investigating this matter. When we arrived at your tavern, their investigation seemed to have already made progress. So, what you're saying is that the mastermind who sent the spy to Lampard's army to kill Prince Thales and to shift the blame onto Lampard is also Lampard's co-conspirator when it came to him killing Prince Maria. It makes your blood run cold, doesn't it? Marquis Shiles shook his head, and his gaze was profound. Archduke Lampard and this person worked together to harm their own country's prince, but immediately after, he betrayed Archduke Lampard and tried to frame him when it came to trying to harm another country's prince. Nobles are like White Mountain Cenarius vultures fighting over carrion. They scheme against each other and try to outwit each other. Under the cloak, Ida suddenly spoke. Northland and Northlanders, even if they were nobles and suzerains, were not like this in the past. Without the Empire, you've sunken even faster. The group traveling forward fell silent for an instant. Northland, Northlanders, some sort of sentiment seemed to have risen in Nicholas's heart. He stared at the crimson dragon flag with the black background and red lining, nodded his head slowly, and then said, one of these days, we will regain our pride as the dragon's children. Anyhow, the Archduke of Black Sands still does not know that the person who tried to frame him is his company conspirator. Marquis Shiles made a fake cough. And we became certain of this from Lampard's progress in his investigations. Chapman Lampard must know about his company conspirator's identity. Since he already knows, why should we not tell the truth to Lampard and work together with him? Thales raised his head with a serious expression on his face. Do not forget that Lampard is also His Majesty's enemy. Working together with him to take revenge on another enemy, I do not think the leader of Black Sand region will listen to us obediently and work together with us. Marquis Shiles sighed. Besides, those Northlanders' personalities are just, tisk tisk. We will not work together with trash like Chapman Lampard, people who kill their own family. Nicholas's gaze was dark. He and his company conspirator must suffer the consequences for Mariah's death. With his smile still as bright as ever on his face, Marquis Shiles took over the rather grim topic and continued putting pressure on Thales' shoulders. Archduke Lampard and the co-conspirator are your enemies. One of them killed most of your men at the fortress, and the other tried to kill you with mystic guns. King Nuven said it very clearly. It does not matter whether you agree to this or not, Your Highness, you are already a part of this. Thales closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. Even though he knew a long time ago that, from the moment that title was placed on his head in the form of a crown, he had to face all the things he once hated to the core. However, he still underestimated the might of the power play in this circle. This was a game where a person had no choice on whether he wanted to play or not, and whether he wanted to give it his all in playing that game. To live for Constellation, is this the kind of rhythm I must live to? What a disgusting feeling. The second Prince of Constellation opened his eyes slowly. To lure Lampard's co-conspirator out, what is Nuven prepared to do? The prince asked faintly. Nicholas was just about to answer when he was interrupted by the prince who used a completely different tone to speak to him. Thales raised his head, and his gaze had the bright glint of a blade that had just been sharpened. Also, if I agree to his plan for vengeance, what sort of benefits will Nuven be willing to give me? Nicholas was stunned for a few microseconds. He noticed that Thales no longer addressed their king as, His Majesty, or, King Nuven. But at the next moment, the commander of the White Blade Guards curled up his lips and put on a faint, cold smile. You will be satisfied. The Star Killer looked at the second prince and enunciated his words clearly. The Charltons, the Dragon Spear family, is never miserly. Thales continued with brightly burning eyes. I have another question. You said that based on the investigation you conducted on Lampard, you learned that his company conspirator is the mastermind behind the plot to murder me using mystic guns. That is right. Nicholas frowned. What of it? Where did you acquire these details in your investigation on Lampard, and how did you verify them? Thales asked in a dark tone. That is our business. Nicholas shook his head. You do not need. But Thales immediately cut him off. This is my business. Thales' expression was firm. With an accented voice, he affirmed his persistence in knowing the truth. Especially when Nuven wants me to risk my life to play in a game of vengeance like this. I have the right to obtain enough information to know whether his plan is feasible. Nicholas stared at Thales. His gaze was icy cold. As to what his heart thought, Thales could not guess. This lasted until Shiles let out a light cough by their side. Nicholas finally spoke slowly. Lampard has been investigating the military spy that commanded the Mystic Gun unit all this while. His subordinates have very efficiently found clues in the black market, but right when they were about to discover the truth, a group of strange swordsmen suddenly appeared. They used a strange power of eradication and killed almost all of Lampard's investigators, causing them to lose their trail. Strange swordsmen, a strange power of eradication. Nicholas nodded. This is not privy to Lampard. That is why he asked for help from a professional, and that professional. The Star Killer lowered his head and looked at his White Blade Guard attire. He is our old acquaintance. And those strange swordsmen, Thales pursued the line of questioning. Nicholas cast him a deep glance. The person King Nuven sent to Constellation to retrieve the prince's body and to investigate the matter of the diplomat group's assassination sent back news a few days ago. Nicholas reported the key parts of the information in detail. The prince's final guard used the Charlton family's secret method and left behind the most crucial clue. There were also some strange swordsmen among the assassins who attacked Prince Mariah. Their powers of eradication were incredibly strange. Thales understood what he meant. Are you saying that the people who assassinated Prince Mariah and stopped Lampard's investigations are the same group of people? Nicholas nodded slightly. Who are they? Based on our information, they are a group of traitors from the Tower of Eradication. They are a group of flies that do no good and only show partial truths to the world. Nicholas looked at all the people on the ground. The Tower of Eradication gave them an incredibly unique name. The Star Killer's expression was profound as he spoke slowly. Disaster swords. Thales' train of thought was interrupted for an instant because of that name. Disaster swords. Wya seemed to have remembered something while listening from the side. He suddenly let out a light gasp. Now that you mention this, when I was in the Tower of Eradication, I had accidentally overheard a few Scions talking about that name before. The disaster swords have always been a legend. It is said that they are a group of traitors who want to replace the Tower of Eradication. Wya, having sensed all the people watching him, said this with a slightly nervous tone. Thales frowned. Wya, let's set aside a time to discuss the power of eradication and the Tower of Eradication, the second prince said. Wya nodded. No matter what, these so-called disaster swords joined Mariah's assassination and the betrayal against Lampard. Their relationship with Lampard's co-conspirator definitely runs deep. That is why they listen to his orders and let him use them as he wants. Nicholas looked at the snow plains ahead and frowned as he spoke. We caught their tails after connecting the two matters together as well. I understand. Thales nodded with a solemn expression, then said, when does Nuven's plan begin? Prestige Orchid Snowland is right before our eyes. Once we pass through it, we will reach Dragon Cloud City, Nicholas said languidly as he cast his gaze into the distance where the snow plains laid, practically one with the horizon. The 5 archdukes should have already reached Dragon Cloud City. The first trial you will have to face is meeting King Nuven with them. Prepare yourself, Your Highness. Shiles winked at him. Are you saying that the target we are looking for, the co-conspirator, is among the 5 archdukes? Thales caught the crucial point with his sharp mind. Only one of the 5 archdukes has a clear stake in this, has enough resources and power, can work together with Lampard and shake Charlton's rule, can mobilize those so-called disaster swords, and even has the courage to assassinate Constellation's prince and betray Lampard. Poutre sucked in a deep breath. He is definitely among the 5 archdukes. He will definitely not miss the arrival of Constellation's prince, not after he has done so much, Nicholas said coldly. Of course. Marquis Shiles rubbed his gloved hands together. The excitement akin to someone watching a great show starting was brimming in his eyes. In public, King Nuven will act in a tough manner against you, and he might be a little violent. Violent? Thales narrowed his eyes. Really now? Thales watched the horizon with a spirited gaze. He touched his neck gently and remembered the feeling of when it was held in someone's tight grip. He said firmly, I love violence the most. Shiles' smile grew even brighter. A strange light shone in Nicholas's eyes. Poutre sucked in huge mouthful of smoke from his tobacco pipe. Ida continued bowing her head, not saying a single word under her cloak. Wya and Ralph only stared at each other blankly. Noon arrived. The sun hung high in the sky above the snow plains, but everyone who had stayed in Northland for many days knew. The day before the bitter cold winter was around the corner. Chapter 122 Until Dawn Came, 1. Your Highness, Lord Poutre asked me to replenish your firewood. The new recruit, Willow Ken, carried a bundle of wood and sat respectfully beside Thales, who was sitting beside the campfire in a daze. Glassy-eyed, Thales nodded. He could not stop thinking about King Nuven's suggestion. This was their last stop before they entered Dragon Cloud City. Behind them, Wya, Ralph, and the veterans of Constellation were anxiously inspecting their equipment under Poutre's supervision. The soldiers of Black Sand region were busy setting up a base camp. On the other hand, with vigilant stares and unpleasant faces, the White Blade guards continued watching them like prison guards. It was as though there was great animosity between them. As the new recruit was about to leave to rejoin his team, the second prince said softly, Willow, ever since our journey began, have you ever felt scared, or anxious, at least? Willow was respectfully placing the bundle of wood on the ground when he heard Thales' words, and it surprised him for a moment. You know, Thales said slowly, to struggle in mysterious dangers every day, and to worry about the cold, the battles, the enemies, everything. Willow was momentarily stunned, as if he had not expected the prince to ask such a question. The new recruit turned and thought carefully before answering, I did feel very anxious right before the battles began. After all, I am not like Uncle Gennard, who could remain so calm even as a blade cuts for his head. But I don't feel scared. Willow furrowed his brows and thought carefully, even forgetting to use a respectful tone. Even though it's very dangerous, I feel that it's a lot simpler. Simpler? Thales asked. What I meant was that, everything happens quickly on the battlefield. After I thrust the pikes forward, there will only be two possible outcomes. Either I survive, or I die. It's better this way. Willow's gaze became dreary, and his expression was a little bleak. At least your hard work will be repaid, and you know what the outcome would be. This way, there is no need to be afraid. Thales carefully scrutinized the new recruit's face. Willow, who taught you how to dual wield? Your parents and elders. Warming his hands on top of the campfire, Thales asked with an indecipherable expression, or a veteran who knows how to dual wield. Willow ran his hand over the twin pikes that were tied to his back and scratched his face in puzzlement. No one taught me, Your Highness. After he was sure that the prince was only making small talk, the new recruit shook his head slowly. As for my parents, they passed away 11 or 12 years ago. 12 years ago. Thales remembered this number. He said slowly, so, it was. Willow shrugged expressionlessly. You know, the disaster caused by the war in Northland. There was no more food in the village. My parents followed the villagers to the nearest village to get some food in exchange for their only possessions, but they never came back. Thales lifted his gaze. According to our village elders, it wouldn't have ended well for them whether they encountered soldiers of Exeter Constellation. The winning party would demand tribute, and the losing party would plunder from them straightaway. Willow said desolately. That was a very chaotic time. Both of them were silent for a while. Then, how did you survive? Thales asked quietly. Gifts for the mountains, Willow sighed, even though all the adults said that those were gifts for the gods and that only travelers could eat them. My sister and I were so hungry that we were going insane. The new recruit showed a wistful expression. Besides, we were not the only ones who did that. When that winter passed, even the gifts on the most secluded treetops were snatched away. The post-war famine in the north, Thales recalled Dukarun's hysterical outburst in Renaissance Palace. However, there still wasn't enough food when spring came, Your Highness. At that time, my younger sister was so hungry that she kept biting her fingers. Lost in thought, Willow stared at the campfire. Fortunately, the pastoral river flowed past our village. So, I followed the people in my village and tried my best to catch fish. We didn't know how to make nets, nor were we able to borrow any. We could not find any spots that had fish either. So I could only rely on the method I used to spear fish when I was young, and kept vigil by the river every day. At first, I always failed, and I was never able to find any shoals of fish. It was the other adults who gave us some of the fish they got. Every time I arrived home with fish, my younger sister would become very happy. Watching my younger sister smile when I left home in the mornings, not knowing whether I would get enough fish that day, Willow's tone was grim. It's often useless even if you work hard. Thales exhaled, but both of you survived. After that, I became more skilled and managed to find shoals of fish. Lowering his head to look at his hands, Willow furrowed his brows. During winter, when the surface of the river was frozen, I could get more fish. All the fish huddled together because of the cold. As I grew up, it wasn't enough anymore to just feed ourselves. I had to get more fish to exchange for other goods in the bazaar. Sometimes, I could even get bronze coins. I started trying to spear fish with both hands. As time went by, I could even pierce through an ice layer with just one hand. This is why I always liked to wield an extra pike in the battlefield. I see. Thales heaved a long sigh. The second prince said faintly, but enlisting at this time, what about your sister? Is she at home? Willow's expression dimmed. No, the new recruit tried his best to smile, but could only muster a bitter expression. She had typhoid fever last year. We had no money, there was nowhere we could get medicine from either, they were only available in large towns. Trembling, Willow said, the only thing I could do was to feed her warm water again and again. Thales furrowed his brows. Coria, the little girl with typhoid fever, crossed his mind. In the end, my younger sister said that she felt like eating fish. But when I returned, Willow went silent and fixated at the campfire. Thales did not say anything either. A few seconds passed, the only sounds both of them could hear were of people around them conversing, and the crackling of the campfire. Then, Willow said desolately, I buried her beside the river. The new recruit blinked furiously, as if there was some foreign substance in his eyes. He said in a soft voice, Your Highness, I really hope that there are also fish in Hell's River. Willow quietly saluted Thales in a less than standard fashion and turned to leave. At this moment, Thales called out to the new recruit. Willow, there are fish in Hell's River. The second prince watched Willow, who turned his head back and flashed a smile. I once read about that in a book. Ellipsis. Are you worrying about what would come next? Standing beside Thales, Poutre watched the new recruit's retreating figure. Sitting beside the campfire, Thales raised his head. Poutre, did you know that according to that recruit just now, he feels that his life right now is very simple, Thales said, lost in thought. Poutre raised his eyebrows. After I thrust the pikes forward, there will only be two possible outcomes. Either I survive, or I die. It's better this way. This was what he said. Thales turned his head as he spoke. But my life is very complicated, so complicated that it tires my heart. Thales' gaze was slightly grim. I thought that the politics within Constellation were complicated enough. Little did I know that Extit, famous for being rough and bold, is also the same. An archduke who harbored ulterior motives, a king set on revenge, and vassals who spoke deprecatingly. All that did not really fit his visualization towards Northland and Extit, the hardy kingdom that stood hardily amid drifting snow and chilly winds. Only Northlanders are this rough and bold. Poutre sat down and took out his tobacco pipe. He shook his head and said, but the ones you are facing are the nobles, the rulers, and those clutching at the reins of power. Thales frowned. King Nuvan, Archduke Lampod, and the 5 archdukes I will be meeting soon, they are also Northlanders, are they not? They are from another species. Poutre lit his tobacco pipe and said quietly, normal people rely on food and air to survive, while they rely on power. The new recruit just now is also a Northlander. His status is low, but at least he does not have to live in constant fear, watching every step he takes, Thales said in low spirits. As for the nobles and suzerains, do they not feel that their way of living is very sad? Poutre exhaled a mouthful of smoke. All of you occupy a more influential position than commoners. Every move has a large-scale connection to everything else and has a far-reaching impact. This is the price you must pay and the sacrifice you must make for power. My God, after regaining my identity as a prince for such a short time, I'm already a little sick of this kind of life. The 7-year-old prince sighed and spoke like an adult. Maybe I'm just not used to it, he thought in silence. Maybe after living longer like this, and experiencing more of such things, I'll be able to get used to it. The life you are sick of is something many people dream of having. Poutre frowned and went back to addressing the prince without proper respect. Little prince, go take a look at the lives of the civilians, those who have to work hard just for their 3 meals. Think about the village we went to before entering the Northern Territory, that pretentious baron and the people in his territory. Then, think again about what you just said. Recalling Willow's experiences, Thales snorted softly. The boy flashed a bitter smile. Of course, I hope that I will have a chance to see the world, and mingle with different communities, whether it is in one of the 2 peninsulas, or the countless islands. Then you should be prepared, some of the places need. Shaking his head, Poutre was suddenly lost for words. He remembered the status of the child in front of him. I'm afraid that as Constellation's heir to the throne, he sighed quietly in his heart. Thales also realized his mistake. To travel around the world, I'm afraid I will most likely never have such a chance in my life, he chuckled bitterly. To battle for Constellation, to die for Constellation, to live for Constellation. Beside the campfire, both of them were silent for a moment. You know, King Kessel was always very happy when he talked about his Uncle John, Thales said quietly. I suddenly know why. Thales blew a mouthful of hot air at his palms and said, John became his eyes, visiting places that he could not go to, and traveling the world. Poutre exhaled softly. You don't have to be disheartened. You will become the king one day, the gaunt vice diplomat said faintly. At that time, you will be able to see the vast world from another angle, an angle that all of us could never imagine. Thales did not say anything, he only stared at the campfire. He suddenly laughed. It sounds very boring, being a king, that is. How did my grandfather persevere for so long? The prince shook his head. Poutre stared at Thales and did not avert his eyes for a long time. Kings can also lead very interesting lives. Watching Thales' expression, Poutre said slowly, every single one of Constellation's 39 kings was unique. And one of them had the most uncommon experience. He was probably the king of Constellation who lived the most legendary and unusual life since Tormund I. Oh, who is that? Thales' interest was piqued. Your Highness, would you be interested in listening to me sing a song? Poutre asked slowly. He sucked in a mouthful of smoke from his tobacco pipe. Of course. Thales' eyes brightened. Gilbert mentioned that you were once a bard and had traveled to many places. Bards. These people travel about and make a living by singing songs and running various small businesses. However, even in Eternal Star City, Thales had only seen them twice. And both instances were at the Grand Bazaar. Ah, singing songs, this is one of the skills that I'm most proud of. Poutre tapped his tobacco pipe and said faintly, now, I am going to sing, When Dawn Came, a story about how three good friends went on an adventure together. Thales gestured for him to proceed. Poutre first cleared his throat and hummed a few short tunes to look for the right pitch. Then, the vice diplomat began singing melodiously and briskly while tapping out the rhythm. When dawn came, and the morning sun arose again. Three men journeyed shoulder to shoulder. Years they've known one another, and their hearts were connected. Sword and axe, staff and lamp, trust and vows, virtue and gratitude. The brothers were one, united in their bodies. They crossed villages, basked in the moonlight, ventured into old castles, and traversed mountains. The elves, hidden ground, the dwarves, homeland, the demon's nest, the monsters, turf. Having escaped death, lived through disaster, and stared into the face of terror, they never despaired. Many adventures awaited, and plenty of stories were recounted. Until the morning sun rose again. Until dawn arrived. Poutre's singing voice flowed slowly, attracting many soldiers to stop and stare. Marquis Shiles walked unhurriedly towards them. On the other hand, Nicholas furrowed his brows as he stared at the campfire from afar. Beside them, even Ida raised her head. Thales thought about the content of the song. The gist of it was that there were three very close friends who experienced many adventures and sagas together. At this moment, Poutre's tempo and key shifted suddenly, becoming low and rich. It was unsettling. In the blood-red night, the sea roared, the enemies hid among the raging waves. There a bloodthirsty king and his undefeated general, the night's wing that sailed across the sky with his immortal army, troops who crawled all over stretches of land with hungry gazes. Ominous shadows enveloped the sun and the sky. Silhouettes of the enemy lurked ceaselessly. Fiendish foes from the east, shaking the ground and destroying cities everywhere they went. One by one, Western Peninsula's battle steeds rose to fight. Come nightfall, the battlefield was silent. The northern wind, cold and bleak. The king's sword, smashed to pieces. The mountains mourned, the knights broke their pikes. Broken blades and ruined shields, the great dragon mourned and constellation dimmed. Chaos, sorrow, despair, disaster. Ceaseless terror, frantic uncontrollable trembling, unending deaths. All hope was lost, and the light faded. The ones remaining lived miserably. The morning sun rose no more, and darkness engulfed the world. Dawn did not come, blood sprawled across the sky. Finally, Poutre's tune reached its deepest pitch. Along with it, the listeners' moods also sunk to their lowest points. But Thales had started thinking about the meaning behind the song. Night wing, the east, the northern wind, the mountains, the great dragon, constellation, these terms, all of them probably have specific origins. He narrowed his eyes slowly, assigning meaning to each of them in his mind. Poutre's tune started to turn lighter. When those beautiful moments were about to fade away, when the future was no longer bright. At the darkest hour, when midnight arrived, the three friends finally began their journey. Their adventures made history, and now their heroic sagas were nigh. Without hesitation, without turning back. Until the morning sun rose again. Until dawn came. Then, Poutre's tune suddenly became filled with fervor and enthusiasm, like a change of scenery in the song. Blood drenched the ground and cleansed the prince's crown, making a generous and sincere promise. Midir wielded his sword and shield. The murky night blurred the prophet's sight. He wandered about, lost, bright lamp in hand. Kaplan held his staff and walked with a smile. Endless sacrifices hardened the hero's soul. His lone figure made a blood oath. Chara's bugle blared through the night. Until the morning sun rose again. Until dawn came. More and more soldiers gathered around Poutre and Thales. Even Ida the elf slowly walked towards them. On the other hand, having heard a few keywords, Thales suddenly understood something. He now knew what sort of scene the song was depicting. Poutre continued singing. The strength of three could rival the king. The union of brothers could fight against death. News spread everywhere, confidence reignited, people gathered under the war flags. Courage ran deep into the bones, and hope spurred their bodies on. United in mind and body. Chara's huge hatchet paved the future, Midir's sword and shield guarded the people. Kaplan's gaze saw through everything, leading them to the final battlefield. Amid the king's bloodthirsty gaze, the enemies from the night were everywhere. Blazing flames of war, blaring battle cries. The last battle began. Until the morning sun rose again. Until dawn came. The singing stopped suddenly. Poutre slowly closed his mouth. Thales raised his head abruptly. "Why did you stop?" he asked, a little lost. "The next part is too long, and my throat is not as good as it used to be." Poutre shook his head in resignation and relit his extinguished tobacco pipe. "And the next part of the story isn't very pleasant," Poutre thought. Having appeared beside them at some point, Marquis Chiles started clapping. Eventually, the soldiers who stopped to listen also started clapping. "That was a splendid performance. You have a beautiful voice. I am afraid that there are not many bards like yourself even in Anlenzo Dukedom's Dragon Kiss Academy," Chiles said with a smile. Poutre bowed slightly as a show of gratitude. An untimely voice suddenly interrupted them. "Return to your positions." Nicholas, the star killer, strode towards them and reprimanded the soldiers in an unpleasant tone. "Does that Constellation 8 sing that well? Are people from Black Sand region so interested in the arts?" Many of the soldiers let out dissatisfied yells, but most of them dispersed. After the soldiers dispersed, Nicholas glared at them with an unpleasant expression. "Do all of you really have to attract so much attention before things began? Is this not what all of you want?" Thales shook his head. "Should you not look as though you want to kill all of us?" Nicholas rudely took a step forward. Having walked over at some point, Ida stood in front of Thales. "Don't be like this, brat. I don't feel like beating you up," the elf said languidly. All right, Marquis Chiles stood between them with a smile. From afar, it looked as if the envoy from the Camus Union had prevented yet another conflict. It was just a song. Besides, he was singing about a legend that all three of our kingdoms are proud of, was he not? Nicholas glanced at Chiles in dissatisfaction. "A legend that all three of our kingdoms are proud of." Thales' eyes lit up. "Poutre, one of the three men you sang about was my ancestor, was it not?" Thales' eyes were glinting. "Yes, you have most probably seen his portrait in Mindy's hall." Poutre inhaled deeply and sucked in a mouthful of smoke from his tobacco pipe, flashing a smile. Thales narrowed his eyes. In his mind, the image of the robust sword and shield warrior who wore a royal crown and stood below a towering tree appeared. The warrior was the one who was in the leftmost painting among the three constellation kings in Mindy's hall. Poutre said faintly, "Constellations, Oathkeeper, the 23rd Supreme King, Midir Jadastar, King Midir IV in your family." Thales suddenly understood. The Midir copper refers to him. For Constellation's currency, the head image of the kingdom's founder, Tormund I, was engraved on the back of gold coins. On the other hand, the head image of the virtuous king, Mindes III, was on the back of silver coins, and that of Midir IV was on the copper coins. The three constellation kings. Poutre nodded. His legend is depicted in the song. Not just him, although he is great indeed, but the Oathkeeper is only one of the three men. Marquis Chiles reminded Poutre with a smile. Poutre chuckled. "All right." Under Thales' curious gaze, he said in addition, before becoming king, Prince Midir had 10 years of adventuring abroad together with his two friends, Chara from Exted and Kaplan from Camus Union. "Adventures?" Thales asked in astonishment. "A future king who adventured abroad?" "Yes, the later generations often delighted themselves in talking about their steadfast friendship and splendid lives." Poutre sighed with emotion and said, "Chara is known as a hero to the people in the Western Peninsula. In the past 1,000 years, only the founder of Exted, Rikaru Exted, had been granted this honor. The prophet, Kaplan Nicola, was a military counselor who foretold things with divine accuracy. It was said that even the gods were jealous of his wisdom. He could even read the minds of humans. The Oathkeeper, Midir Jadastar, was a noble and fearless prince. He was an exemplary individual who was willing to give up his throne for the sake of friendship and his vow." Thales felt a chill run down his spine. He could not help but notice that upon hearing these three names, Marquis Chiles became quiet. Even Nicholas had a solemn expression. And even the nonchalant Ida lowered her head in silence. Poutre exhaled softly. "This is about the Western Peninsula's three legendary heroes, and the most glorious moment of their lives. The Battle of Dawn." Chapter 123 Until Dawn Came, 2. "This happened 300 years ago," the vice diplomat said faintly. "At that time, Midir Jadastar was one of Constellation's many princes. He was said to be impulsive, lively, and restless when he was young, similar to Tormund I who founded the kingdom." Poutre sighed softly. Not long after he reached adulthood at 16, he snuck out of the capital city to seek the kind of adventures depicted in stories and songs. He then encountered Chara and Kaplan at Dragon-Kissed Land. Thales raised his eyebrows and said in astonishment, "Snuck out of the capital city? So, the princes and princesses who dress as commoners to sneak out of the palace really do exist? Hey, do not just talk about your kingdom's prince." Marquis Chiles protested and turned towards the second prince with a smile. Kaplan Nicola was a Camion and the pride of Good Flow City. He was born in a renowned family of businessmen who were tycoons in the fishing industry. It was said that, since young, he was intelligent and mature, and was known as a genius, just like you, your highness. Thales forced a smile. How about you? Poutre glanced at Nicholas, who had his arms crossed. Don't you have anything to say as a Northlander? The Star Killer raised his gaze and looked around. Chara was an undisputed hero, a typical Northlander, and a fearless Extatian. Nicholas shook his head expressionlessly. He had no family name, and there is no need for later generations to remember his family name because he didn't need to prove his mightiness through his origins and bloodline. We just need to look at his actions. Marquis Shiles winked at Poutre in resignation. No family name, is that so? A sarcastic voice rose from beside Thales. But after the war, Chara married the Walton family's daughter and merged his blood with that of the Dragon Spear family. Everyone turned their heads to the side. Thales realized in shock that Ida was the one who spoke. Sitting on the snow-covered ground while hugging her legs, Ida's disdainful words traveled from beneath her cloak. Speaking of which, this tactless elf had been talking a lot lately. His son took the Walton family name and became the Archduke of Dragoncloud City. Drawing support through his father's awe-inspiring reputation, he became the common elected king of Extit. And just like that, Chara sat behind his son as regent for a good 30 years until his death. We just need to look at his actions, huh? Ha, Ida chuckled. In my opinion, in the face of power, Chara, the so-called hero, was just like the others. Nicholas frowned. Thales wore a curious gaze. Poutre coughed. Anyhow, your highness, the three of them gathered in dragon-kissed land and formed a team, beginning their legendary adventures. Throughout those 10 years, they traversed the entire western peninsula and even the west coast of the eastern peninsula as mercenaries, tourists, traders, adventurers, and even explorers. Their friendship was indestructible, and their experiences had long since become legends that were weaved into songs by bards, especially after the Battle of Dawn. For example, seeking dragons in the desert, traversing 1,000 miles to hunt for demons, the merfolk's chaos in the Demon Sea, the founding of Anlenzo Dukedom, the wanted man of the Forbidden Forest, the demise and rebirth of the Sacred Tree, the mystery of Brave Soul's Fort, the demon priest of Horsewhip City, and others. They are all renowned songs that depict the experiences of those 10 years for the three men. At the very least, Chara's fearlessness and bravery, Midier's steadfastness and reliability, as well as Kaplan's wit and vigilance were depicted with great eloquence in these songs. Hearing the names of these songs, Thales' curiosity grew. Seeking dragons, hunting for demons, demonic priests, from what I can remember, aren't these the lives of people who come together and form teams in those fantasy worlds? Why is my life completely different? He sighed internally. Poutre sucked a long mouthful from his tobacco pipe and softly said, and the Third Peninsula War broke out at that time. Everybody said nothing. The worst nightmare befell the Western Peninsula. The three men faced the most terrifying opponent. Under Thales' questioning look, Poutre cleared his throat and gently uttered a name. Laurie Corleone, the Nightwing King. Poutre raised his gaze and cast Thales a meaningful glance. Thales tucked his hands under his fur cloak and subconsciously touched the Fang's bracelet against his bosom. Corleone, really? He was the possessor of the Blood Ocean throne, the master of the Blood Fangs, the Corleone family, and the founder and eternal ruler of the Night Kingdom. It is said that he was one of the oldest and scariest Blood clansmen. According to legend, when he spread his gigantic wings open, even the most brilliant sun rays will be shrouded in endless, bloody darkness. Poutre adjusted his tone. All of them looked as if they were crowding around the fireplace to exchange ghost stories. It is surmised that he had lived for countless years. Before he went missing, he was once known as a being who surpassed the supreme class. The missing Nightwing King, Laurie Corleone, Thales recalled the fight between the two Corleone maidens, or should he say ladies. Isn't he there, father? Ridiculous. Surpassing supreme class, Nicholas sneered. There's no such thing at all. They are just false rumors spread by the bards. Poutre ignored Nicholas and continued to speak with regard for no one but himself. When the Third Peninsula War took place, the Night Kingdom happened to be at its peak. Led by Laurie Corleone, the allied forces of the Eastern Peninsula unexpectedly came ashore at Extit's eastern cliff, which is the most dangerous and impossible part to land on, and launched a night raid. Based on the two previous wars, everyone thought that the people from the Eastern Peninsula would land at Constellation. They anticipated that the Western Peninsula's shield would once again stall the Eastern Peninsula's attack until reinforcements from Extit's bold and powerful, heavy infantry troops and those from the other kingdom rushed over. Thales was all ears. The outcome was obvious. The utterly unprepared Extit was ambushed. Elifer City was the first to be captured. Marquis Shiles smiled and said, after that, Elifer City's Archduke Gadro had to import a large amount of city defense machines every year from Steel City to defend the eastern side of their shores. Good Flow City was responsible for the transportation. Poutre continued speaking. The enemy's troops surged in without end through this opening, which was located on a sea cliff. They crossed the weakly defended inland of Extit without difficulty and advanced into Dragoncloud City. Your Highness, you can read the detailed battle records from various major history books, Poutre sighed. In short, after a few horrifying battles, the Nightwing King's awe-inspiring reputation was once again acknowledged. It was the most disastrous series of failures since the establishment of Extit, who took pride in their warriors and military forces. As for the reinforcements of the other kingdoms that traveled north, even Constellation's expeditionary forces were annihilated without warning. The army forces of other kingdoms didn't stand a chance at all. I heard that there were very few survivors. Even the king of Extit of that time died in battle at Dragon Cloud City. Thales was stunned. He turned to look at the current commander of the White Blade Guards. That was also an important part of what was recorded in the Book of White Blade Legends, Nicholas said suddenly with a complicated gaze. It was the 10th time the White Blade Guards was annihilated since the era of the Empire, and also the 3rd, White Blade disgrace, to have our king die despite our heavy protection. Since the era of the Empire, Thales thought, do the White Blade Guards have such a long history? They existed even before the establishment of Extit. Poutre shook his head. No one could ward off the Nightwing King's invincible forces, along with his strange, versatile and unpredictable military tactics. At some point, the Western Peninsula was unable to assemble even a single expedition troop that had the combat capability to intercept the people from the Eastern Peninsula. At least, this was what the history books recorded. Thus, the Nightwing King's army roamed freely across Northland and was almost unbeatable. Dragon Cloud City fell into a hopeless last-ditch defense. After the king died, Extit was in turmoil. There were only a few archdukes who persisted in the fighting, Poutre said faintly. And the Eastern Peninsula sent word requesting to conduct peace negotiations based on the situation of that time. Facing heavy casualties and a huge price to pay, Constellation and the other small kingdoms were starting to consider the Eastern Peninsula's suggestion. At that moment, the three men stood at the forefront of history and rescued the Western Peninsula that was in jeopardy. Thales inhaled softly. The three Dawn heroes. Poutre nodded. Chara, Midir, and Kaplan assembled the remaining troops. Their fight inspired Constellation and the other kingdoms. The Star Killer cut him off. Stop boasting about yourselves, Nicholas taunted. He crossed his arms and lifted his gaze. Chara the hero, he was the first and only one to step forward. Alone, Chara held a black flag and returned to Extit's battlefield. He called and assembled the Extitians who had lost the will to fight, deep in the mountains, in the countryside, and within the pine forests. The Extitians fought against the people of the Eastern Peninsula with no regard for bloodshed and sacrifice, in every single district and territory. Isolated and helpless, he was hopelessly outnumbered. In the beginning, he even suffered a series of defeats. However, Chara never gave up. Heroes are casted this way, by the cultivation of bravery and determination through the shedding of blood. That was a promise between the three men. Poutre refuted coldly. Midir and Kaplan returned to Constellation and Camus respectively and tried their best to convince their own kingdom to fight one last time. This doesn't mean that the other two men are cowards. I am not talking about Midir, but all of you, the reinforcements from Constellation, Nicholas said mockingly. Midir brought a reinforcement of 20 men. The bards remember this number clearly. 20 men. Thales looked at Poutre curiously, waiting for him to respond. Poutre frowned. At that time, Constellation was indeed deeply concerned about dispatching more troops. After all, the opponent was Nightwing King's army force, and Midir was only a prince who had left home for many years. Moreover, he requested for military power the moment he returned. On top of that, as a prince, Midir was ordered to stop participating in Extit's military affairs. Poutre's eyes shone. However, Midir did not yield. Facing such an order, Midir threw the 9-pointed star emblem, the symbol of the Jadestar royal family, onto the ground in front of all the courtiers. This meant that he gave up his right to inherit the throne, Poutre said softly. Thales' eyes widened slowly. Please do not forget that Constellation was built on an oath. Midir said this before the entire enraged royal court of Constellation. The Oath Keeper. So that's how. Thus, the Oath Keeper walked out of Renaissance Palace and headed north towards Extit with 20 warriors who were still willing to follow him, and rushed to the rescue of Chara who was fighting a lone battle. This is why we only have respect for the Oath Keeper. Nicholas laughed. When all of Constellation became cowards, he was one of the few courageous Constellations. Even the Camions were better than all of you. Poutre did not say anything. About this, I have to say that Kaplan the prophet unexpectedly, Shiles coughed softly and chipped in. This is also why the citizens of Camus admire him. From the raising of the bill, to the gathering of consensus, and then getting the resolution passed, Kaplan Nicola is the only person in history who managed to convince the highest unified parliament of Camus to dispatch troops within 86 days. All 14 states at that time agreed to entrust their last remaining resources to Kaplan, a 30-year-old young man, allowing him to bring those resources to the battlefield in Extit. Those resources included military troops, provisions, and money. If all of you are familiar with the unified parliament's lack of efficiency when it comes to discussions, and know a thing or two about the greed and selfishness of the various states' congressmen, Marquis Shiles sighed. God knows how Kaplan did it. That is your history, not ours. In the end, it was still Constellation's reinforcements that saved the battlefield, wasn't it? Poutre narrowed his eyes. Thales raised his head and watched the three men. However, Kaplan's act of leading troops to provide reinforcements was obviously effective. Camus Union's status in the world increased greatly because of it. Shiles spread his arms wide. Thus, the three men reunited at the battlefield and confronted the Eastern Peninsula's army. They learned from the lessons of the past. This battle persisted for over a year. In the end, in Prestige Orchid region, where we are standing on right now, in the Prestige Orchid snowfield, Poutre said quietly, Chara the hero, Kaplan Nicola the prophet, and Midir Jadastar the Oathkeeper led the last allied forces set on fighting back, and intercepted the Eastern Peninsula's main forces. Here, they began the final battle with the Nightwing King, Laurie Corleone, who was invincible and highly renowned after invading the Western Peninsula along with the countless ferocious troops under him. Thales lowered his head and touched the snow beneath his feet. Prestige Orchid Snowfield, on this land 300 years ago. The horrifying battle began at dawn. It was said that blood covered the whole snowfield at night, and its reflection illuminated the moon and made it extremely red. Poutre continued showcasing his skills as a bard. Both parties suffered heavy casualties, and their blood converged into a warm river that melted the snow faster than usual. Midir fought until his armor was battered. Chara, the commander-in-chief, was in danger at some point. Even Kaplan the prophet lost his life in that heroic battle, until the moment when dawn came and the morning sun rose. The vice diplomat paused for a while. Thales listened quietly. No one interrupted him. Even Nicholas had lowered his head and did not speak. Amid the silence, Poutre said softly, they won. The cold wind whistled over the campfire and caused the crackling flames to burn even brighter. This was the Battle of Dawn. It was one of the 4 major reversal battles in history, together with the Holiness Exorcism campaign during the Age of Feudal Kings, the Reversal Gust battle during the Battle of Eradication, and the War of Brilliance during the Fourth Peninsular War. Of course, this is what all of us in the Western Peninsula say. The kingdoms in the Eastern Peninsula obviously have completely different opinions. Poutre concluded gradually. Ever since then, the hero, the prophet, and the Oathkeeper were known as the West's 3 Dawn heroes. Thales took a deep breath. The Battle of Dawn, the story of the 3 heroes. And his extraordinary, spontaneous ancestor who was willing to relinquish the throne for the sake of friendship and loyalty. No one noticed that a cloaked figure in a corner was quietly staring at the campfire without moving after listening to the song and the story from beginning to end. Even though Midir threw away the Jadastar royal family's emblem, he still inherited the throne and became the king of oath-keeping, right? The second prince raised his head to ask. Poutre nodded. Yes, after the Battle of Dawn, his prestige was unparalleled. He was also the best candidate to inherit the throne. On the other hand, Chara married a lady from the Walton family. Their son later became the new king of Extit. Shiles smiled as he said, as for Kaplan Nicola, a gigantic bronze statue of him was erected in the center of Good Flow City, to commemorate this wise prophet, his sacrifices, and his contributions to Good Flow City and Camus Union status in the Western Peninsula. Something's amiss, Thales thought. The backgrounds of the 3 Constellation Kings' portraits seemed to depict their greatest contributions. Tormund I's portrait had the Battle of Eradication as its background. But Thales remembered clearly that in Midir IV's portrait where the late king wielded a sword and a shield, it had a towering tree as its background. But according to the story, shouldn't Midir IV's greatest contribution be the Battle of Dawn? Thales frowned. At this moment, Nicholas said slowly, you didn't mention the last part, what happened after the battle? Poutre sighed. Thales wore a curious expression. What happened after the battle? Poutre only spoke after a moment of silence. The saddest thing happened, the vice diplomat said faintly. After the war, Chara and Midir, the pair of intimate friends who were supposed to be brought closer by life and death, fell apart. Constellation and Extit's relationship, which had initially improved, had also deteriorated quickly as a result. Nicholas's voice rang out. Midir took the opportunity to build the Broken Dragon Fortress while Extit was weak. Ever since then, the fortress became our largest threat, a gigantic bastion that can withstand the day before the bitter cold winter, set on the border, easy to defend but hard to attack, held countless garrison troops, kept watch on our every move, and can be used as an outpost to advance northwards at any time. Nicholas fixed his glare on Thales and said, if it wasn't for the fact that the Battle of Dawn just ended, and Chara had become renowned for having dealt the Nightwing King a heavy blow, I have no doubt that Constellation would have advanced north and attacked Extit at that time. Little Prince, why do you think we care so much about that stupid fortress of yours? Thales was utterly stunned. Broken Dragon Fortress, a distinguished bastion that guards Constellation's northern territory, a staunch city wall, and a fortress that stops the Great Dragon from pushing southwards. So this is how the Extitians see it, an outpost for Constellation to advance towards the north. And, he lowered his head, Chara and Midir, comrades in arms who adventured 10 years together and entrusted their lives to each other, they fell out. Why? Thales clenched his teeth, raised his head and asked, why did Chara and Midir fall out? Poutre sighed and shook his head. Don't know. Don't know, Nicholas said with a dissatisfied expression. I know something that is being said about this. That is just an unverified rumor, Poutre said disdainfully. At least it is something. Nicholas rudely cut him off. Marquis Shiles watched the 2 men with considerable interest as they argued. The Star Killer's voice drowned that of Constellation's vice diplomat. There's nothing to hide. Nicholas completely ignored Poutre's unpleasant expression. He sneered and said faintly, the two most outstanding men in the Battle of Dawn fell out because of a woman. What? Thales' mouth fell open in shock. A woman? Poutre exhaled. His expression was still unpleasant. If you really have to put it this way, you will be looking down on the friendship between the hero and the Oathkeeper, tarnishing their past glory and shared legends. You will also be insulting Queen Izora's honor while offending Constellation's Jadestar family and Sacred Tree Kingdom's Leaf-Fall family. Queen Izora, Thales heard an unfamiliar name, and Sacred Tree Kingdom, Leaf-Fall family. What of it? Nicholas said, blunt and cold. Everyone knows that when Chara persisted and fought alone in Northland, Constellation's Oathkeeper, Midir Jadestar, snatched Chara's lover away. He even married her and made her queen after that. Thales was stunned. Under Poutre's displeased gaze, the Star Killer shook his head and said, an elf queen. Elf, queen, the woman Chara loved, Midir the Fourth's queen. The second prince's heart pounded. Another gust of cold wind whistled past them. Thales suddenly realized that Ida, who was behind him, had disappeared at some point. Chapter 124 Queen of the Sky. Brat, I know what you're thinking about, but if you continue using that strange gaze to look at me. Ida walked beside Thales' steed and clenched her fists, her index fingers knuckle-jutted out. Her tone was incredibly impatient. You know what will happen to you. All right, Thales, whose curiosity had already reached its peak, stuck out his tongue and turned his head around. If you don't want to answer, it's fine. The prince sighed from the bottom of his heart. Ida sighed softly and sealed the memories of her past in the bottom of her heart once more. Jadestar. Those damn Jadestars. Speaking of which, Ida, how did you become the Jadestar royal family's secret protector? Thales watched the indistinct mountain range that was gradually appearing before his eyes and asked airily, how did an elf come to be employed in Constellation, a country belonging to humans? I heard that they are incredibly prideful, and those who serve humans are one of a kind. Ida lowered her head. Hey, brat, there was a slightly awkward tone in the elf's voice. I already said before that I am not your family's guard, and... Ida folded her arms across her chest, and her voice was full of scorn. You're just a brat, how much could you possibly know about the elves? Thales could only stick out his tongue and shake his head in resignation. This highly questionable elf, this elf who had lived for several centuries and even met the virtuous King Mindes as well as Prince Kira, must have plenty of exciting stories. As for her personality, after the group crossed a hill covered in snow, Poutre steered his steed next to Thales. The thin vice diplomat's face was solemn as he lifted his finger and pointed at the direction they were headed for. We are here. Thales registered what was going on and quickly lifted his head to look down the slope. With his blurry vision caused by the snow that covered the world, he saw a giant with silver and black colors intersecting with each other appear in the mountains. No, that was not a giant. Its contour appeared vaguely in the snow in the distance. That was a majestic city built at the foot of mountains. He could faintly see a flag with dashes of red and black fluttering in the wind above the city. Its grayish-black walls were adorned by silvery white snow. The highest point of the city was located at the tallest summit of all the mountains. From the distance, the city looked like a giant leaning against a snow mountain. There were plenty of villages and small towns surrounding and protecting it, and the city stood erect in the land to the north. Thales signaled for Wya to stop his restless steed. He sucked in a breath of the freezing wind unique to the north and quietly gazed at the majestic and powerful city in the distance. A slight wave of excitement stirred in his heart. This is the great dragon of the north, the capital of Exted. Without even realizing it, they had already crossed Prestige Orchid Snowland and entered a new territory. This is the first time you saw such a grand sight, right? Nicholas rode to their side. The corners of his lips curled up, and his face was filled with longing for his homeland and respect. The giant city with the mountains on her back. The largest, most magnificent, most majestic city in the Northland with the longest history. The holy land in Northlanders' hearts. Dragon Cloud City. At that moment, a light snort traveled into the air from his side at an inappropriate time. It was not known as Dragon Cloud City in the beginning. Nicholas cast his gaze upon the Constellation who interrupted him. It was built in the era of the feudal kings, and is one of the places humans gathered to in the north. And during the age of the ancient empire, it was the provincial capital of the original empire's Northland province. Poutre continued what Nicholas had left off without any expression on his face. The fort that is built at that foot of the mountain was originally known as Arun Fort. It is the dwelling place for the Arun family for generations and whom were ordered by the emperor to govern the Northland. When the empire fell, this place fell into a chaos and alternation of power that lasted for 300 years. It continued until one day, Rikaru and Tormund's armies joined forces nearby and obtained our first victory in the Battle of Eradication. It was Rikaru who led the army and saved Tormund, who was in a perilous situation. Nicholas shook his head, unbothered. With his own understanding, he corrected the Constellation's words. That is why that war was known as the Reversal Gust. It is said that Rikaru's army moved like lightning on an empty field nearby, and as if they had descended from the sky, they destroyed the enemies from the back. Thales pursed in lips in resignation. Oh well, it's the small difference in opinion between the Extatians and Constellations, the Northlanders and the citizens of the Empire again. And, while they're both Northlanders, Nicholas seems to be even more stubborn than Kenvida. As expected, Thales exhaled. There was an expression of disapproval on his face. So, how did this place turn into Extat's capital? Thales asked at the appropriate time, cutting off the intense discussion that was about to start again. Nicholas gestured to them to continue moving onwards. The commander of the White Blade Guards rode and began speaking like a real escort. This land was built with Dragon Cloud City as its center, and it belongs to the Walton family, the family where Nuven VII was born. It is also the ruling family that has the greatest reputation in Extat. They held the title of Archduke of Dragon Cloud City for generations. Humanity's hero, Rikaru Extat, became the suzerain of this place 600-something years ago. He formed an alliance with 9 knights here and swore an oath to protect the Northland and their homeland amid the chaos wrought by the Battle of Eradication, to regain the Northlanders' pride. From then on, the prideful Northlanders called their new kingdom, Extat, and the Extat Union was formed. During the subsequent years, the 9 knights returned to the land after expanding the country's territory, which to them had been like slicing butter with a hot knife. They elected Rikaru Extat as the king the Northlanders would wholeheartedly accept and would follow him to their deaths. The 9 knights obtained their own fiefdoms to protect Dragon Cloud City. The history of the Union ended here, and the start of Extat's history began. With the spirit of fair rule and where the position of the ruler will rotate among the other suzerains, Extat's highest ruler, who is the common elected king, would be chosen from among the 10 archdukes. The remaining others would obey his authority and commands. This was the oath Rikaru swore so that the other knights could rule together with him, and you can see that his prestige and influence extends until this date. Since King Nuven has the title of the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City as well, Dragon Cloud City hence also became the capital of Extat. At that moment, a military courier from Black Sand region moved through the layers of blocks made by the White Blade Guards with much difficulty and reached Nicholas's side, asking him to meet with Viscount Kenvida. Once Nicholas left, Thales turned his head around and looked towards Poutre. You have something to say, the prince said with a certain tone. Of course, the vice diplomat shook his head in disdain. Do not believe in our hot-blooded Northland friends, especially in that nonsense he spouts about, fair rule and where the position of the ruler will rotate among the other suzerains. It is just used to trick the Northlanders. In truth, in Northland and perhaps in all other places in the world, power has always been the one that decides matters. Those with power will become king. Oh, Thales chuckled softly, since that hot-blooded Northland friend of ours has left, then do you mind telling me more, my knowledgeable vice diplomat who is gifted with many talents and who knows the Northland well? Poutre extended his hand into his bosom, intending to take out his tobacco pipe, but the former bard hesitated for a few seconds. Then, though it was unknown whether he was lamenting over the fact that he only had very little tobacco left or he was struck by a conscience, he pulled his hand back with a pained expression. He spoke to the second prince. I do not know whether you have noticed it, but the first ruler of Dragon Cloud City and the first common elected king of Extat is Rikaru Extat, but the Dragon Cloud City we see now is under the rule of Nuven Walton VII's rule. Thales registered what was going on soon. Extat and Walton are 2 family names, which means that the ones who inherited his position and his title are not his direct descendants. Poutre lifted his brows and nodded. The true history, or the history that you can find in Constellation's records are as follows. Rikaru died young and he did not have any children. After he passed away, his nephew, Nuven Walton, inherited the title of suzerain of Dragon Cloud City. He was the first Nuven from the Walton family to become the suzerain of Dragon Cloud City, Nuven I. From then on, with the Cloud Dragon Spear as their symbol, the Walton family ruled this land and this city to this day. But Nuven I's blood made the suzerain skeptical of his legitimacy and also caused the other suzerains to cast covetous eyes on the throne of the common elected king. No matter how many times he stressed that his mother was Rikaru's older sister and how Nuven himself was the legitimate successor closest to the former king Rikaru, it could not diminish the ambitions the other 9 suzerains harbored in their hearts. Even if they were the model knights that had been loyal to Rikaru. A light crease appeared between Thales' brows. During that moment, what laid in his mind was not Rikaru and his 9 knights. Instead, he was thinking of the gigantic portrait in the middle of Mindy's hall. On the battlefield under the setting sun was a young knight covered with injuries. 6 people accompanied him and charged forward fearlessly. Constellation's king of Renaissance, Tormund Jadastar I, with his 6 knights who were the celebrated families of the dukes in their territories, the 6 great clans. Arund, with their white-backed flying falcon, Cullen, with their sun sword and shield, Covendier, with their tricolored iris flowers, Fakenhas, with their 4-eyed skull, Nanchester, with their great deer antlers, and Tabark, with their blood moon. Together with the ancestors of the 13 distinguished families, they were the ones who fought beside Tormund in the past. Were they loyal to the king of Renaissance in the past? Just like the 9 suzerains, the 9 knights, behind Rikaru. Poutre continued, an intense conflict erupted between Dragon Cloud City's Nuven I and the 9 Knights as well as their descendants, for Extit's throne and the issue of the legitimate right of succession. After the war, the suzerains' stalemate and conflict lasted for several decades. At that time, Extit was practically 10 fragmented pieces. They were known as one country, but in truth, they were enemies who were like oil and water. During this period of time, the survivors of the final empire were at the bank of Shepherd's River, located to the south. The new country that was originally insignificant and built on the area that was once the ancient chauvinistic province's territory, began slowly rising to power and continued expanding its territory outwards. Thales understood what he meant and answered, Tormund I, the king of Renaissance. That's right, Poutre nodded, a peculiar light shone in his eyes. Constellation. In the end, due to the pressure cast by the rising constellation, Nuven I and the 9 suzerains came to a compromise in the end, though it was in the most awkward fashion possible. Under the support of the 9 suzerains, Nuven Walton continued to possess the common elected king's seat, and Nuven I used the name of the great previous king Rikaru and designated Extit's territories once again, then conferred the 10 suzerains, including himself, the titles of Extit's legitimate 10 archdukes. But once Nuven I died, the king must be chosen once more from among the 10 archdukes. They would vote on their own to choose a new common elected king, and the new king will rule until his death. This repeated itself, and Extit's king selection system was established and applied for 600 years. This is the so-called oath. Rikaru swore so that the other knights could rule together with him, because it is the oath 10 people swore in Rikaru's name and was also made once they signed their names under Rikaru's signature. Ironically, it has nothing to do with Rikaru. Hold on, Thales was stupefied by Poutre's words. The king selection system, I only read the general idea of it when I was in Mindy's hall. The 10 archdukes vote at the same time and choose someone from among them. What if they had the same number of votes? Is there a mature system with rules to ascertain that the common elected king will be chosen in a smooth manner during the king selection congress? Thales remembered a peculiar movie he watched in his previous life. In there, the pirates had to choose a pirate king, but in the end, all the candidates chose themselves one. There is, and it is simple, straightforward, effective, and filled with the romantic flair of the Northlanders, Poutre said in a low voice, that method has inherited the customs of the empire in the age of glory from the knights. It is still used by Extit, and when the archdukes are in a bind, they will use it to choose who the throne will belong to. Inherited the customs of the empire, use it to choose who the throne will belong to. Thales tightened his grip over the reins and remembered something he heard from Caslin in the Hero Tavern. He could not help but be shocked. Are you saying? Yes, Poutre nodded. With a complicated gaze, he uttered 2 words with some force. Through battle. Thales was stunned. When the Sacred King Selection Congress cannot perform the final choice, the candidates for king with the same number of votes, no matter their age or status, must enter the arena to personally prove their worth. They must prove in the arena that they have the bravery that is worthy of the common elected king, the leadership qualities that can lead the Northlanders, the fearlessness in battle born from being numb to death, and the ability to stand victorious in the end. When he heard this, the Archduke of Black Sand, Chapman Lampard's face that alternated between light and dark due to the illumination by the light from the fire suddenly appeared in Thales' mind. He also remembered the battered old sword on his table. In the end, they were Northlanders. Thales suddenly realized that even though he had already stepped into Extit's territory in the north, his understanding of them still remained very basic. This country in the north that was famous for their strength and their determination was far more complicated and peculiar than he thought. And he was about to face them. Continue. Thales frowned with a solemn expression. Before I face them, I would like to understand the archdukes of Extit. Such is their relationship with the common elected king. Poutre only paused for a moment before he nodded his head and continued. The archdukes of Extit have absolute autonomy in their own territories. They will only show obedience to the common elected king and have the duty of sending their soldiers to battle when the country is at war. They also need to fix the quota for tax, though I heard that many archdukes cannot even do this. They can decide the matters in their territories on their own, and whether or not they want to accept and carry out the king's decrees, which is supposed to be effective through the entire country, completely depends on the archduke's wishes. Don't the archdukes of Extit have too much power in their hands, then? Surprise appeared on Thales' faces. As he moved forward, he sighed softly. Can it be considered a miracle that Extit has not been divided even now? That is right, which is why they are called archdukes and not the dukes during the age of the empire. Poutre sighed. To a certain extent, Extit, born from a compromise, is even more divided than Constellation. The power they have to run their own territories is far greater than what the dukes have in Constellation. At least, no matter how miserly and unwilling he is, Duke Cullen still has to send a certain amount of money from Eastern Sea Hill to pay a sufficient amount of his taxes to Eternal Star City and His Majesty. The appointment or removal of important officials in Constellation as well as the appointment or demotion of nobles must adhere to the Holy Constitution of Constellation. In fact, they have to verify these promotions or demotions through the Supreme King's warrant, which is why if the dukes want to interfere with the kingdom's politics, the fastest way they can do so is to take part in Eternal Star City's central departments, or by drawing the kingdom's aldermen to their side with the influence of their territory. Thales shook his head. Then what is the point of having a common elected king? If he cannot even control his own archdukes who are his subordinates, then why does he still want to be the common elected king? Poutre pondered over it for a moment before he answered seriously, for great prestige, the obedience of the other suzerains, and the legitimate name of the rule of Extit. Thales frowned again. This is much more effective for Northland than for Constellation. No matter how uncultured these Northlanders are, they know that the common elected king's authority cannot be infringed upon. They cannot go against Reikaru's oath. Poutre recalled his knowledge and continued. In history, there are 3 occurrences where the archdukes of Extit rose against the common elected king because they were displeased with him, but every single time, it ended in failure. Because no matter how the archdukes who rose against the common elected king tried to defend themselves with their arguments, once they publicly ignore Reikaru's oath, they will lose the public support from their subordinates and their people. Even the greediest Northlander will not be willing to fight for them. Some of these archdukes' families even withdrew from the right of ruling Extit ever again. Thales stared at Dragon Cloud City in the distance. He puffed a breath of warm air on his cold hands and started thinking carefully. Great prestige, a legitimate name, the loyalty of the people. The traditional culture of the Northland. Too simple, Thales said faintly several seconds later. A puzzled expression appeared on Poutre's face. I'm saying that concluding Reikaru's reputation and the Northlanders, personalities as well as their traditions are the factors contributing to Extit's stability and unified power is too simple. Thales lowered his head and started thinking about this carefully. Human actions and the structure of power in society will always affect each other. It is impossible for this situation to exist where acts alone will solidify a structure, but the structure of this society has no effect on human actions. It does not matter how great the conduct of the Northlanders are, how much they revere their ancestor, and how much they respect their tradition, they cannot maintain this sort of state system. A power structure that is bound to be divided and shatter will only bring about the same effects on the Northlanders. They are bound to live under a structure where they are ruled by different suzerains, have different interests, and different systems. As generations come and go and as society changes, they will develop a set of actions and motives that fit the structure of that era. Under this strange, divided system Extit has, it is difficult for the Northlanders to not treat each other as enemies and kill each other. That's right, Thales nodded mentally. This was the society he knew of. But Extit was. Do you have any other thoughts? Poutre narrowed his eyes and asked while he pondered over Thales' words, why don't you voice them out so that I may hear them? The second prince remained silent for a moment before he said one word, constellation. Thales lifted his head and said with an affirmative tone, constellation. A glint appeared in Poutre's eyes, and he waited for the prince's explanations. It is just as you said, Constellation's expansion and growth in power should have facilitated Extit's stability and unity to a certain extent. Thales patted the steed beneath him, causing the horse that did not like him to become restless. Wya scrabbled about to control Thales' steed, and Thales gave him an apologetic smile. Thales turned his head around and continued speaking, with that gigantic existence in the south, not a single one of the archdukes or suzerains in Extit will face it alone. They must sit down, bring their conflicts in line, and face the enemy as a unified front. Poutre nodded in praise. This is a good angle. Indeed, Constellation's existence has largely put the conflict between the common elected king and the archdukes in check, and also made them shift their attention away. Thales sucked in a deep breath. But if I turn it around, isn't Extit's existence and the threat it brought with its existence also the reason that caused the internal factions of power in Constellation to band together? No. Thales looked at the city that was getting closer and clearer, and then lowered his head slightly. Constellation and Extit affect each other. Even if I analyze it in this manner, it's still completely insufficient. This is not the main reason behind why Extit can last to this day, and not why the authority of the common elected king can remain so stable in his hands. Just what sort of power is holding together Extit, which should have been a fragmented country, and made it continue to this day, remaining stable and powerful? Thales stared at the red and black flag in the distance and narrowed his eyes. Ellipsis. They ran into the first sentry post in Dragon Cloud City which was just in front of them. The White Blade Guards were speaking to them at that moment. Then, the escorts who had been protecting him over the past few days came up to him. This is the furthest we can send you, Prince Thales. Black Sand Region's Viscount Kenvida was rounding up his troops. He looked at Dragon Cloud City, located right before his eyes, and sighed. Thankfully, nothing happened along the way. Thank you for escorting me along the way, even though we did not ask for it, Poutre sighed. His face was indifferent, and thank you for your welcoming ceremony as well. Kenvida was not bothered by Poutre's attitude, and neither did he acknowledge the hostile glares from the White Blade Guards around him. Kenvida nodded to Tolja behind him, gesturing to him that they were prepared to leave. Then, he turned his head back and said to Thales. Then we will bid you farewell here. I hope that things will go smoothly for you when you are in Dragon Cloud City. Thales stared intently at Archduke Lampard's strategist. The experience and efficiency he displayed when he commanded his army on the way, his sharp wit and the unique train of thought he showed when they were in the Hero Tavern all left a deep impression in Thales. Several seconds later, the second prince suddenly asked, "Why is his grace not coming?" Viscount Kentvida was stunned. King Neuven sent an invitation to all the other 9 archdukes in Extit, did he not? But Lampard is not here. Thales remembered his discussion with Poutre from moments ago and said quietly, "You know, perhaps King Neuven wants all of Extit to see how the common elected king will handle Constellation's prince, starting with the White Blade Guard's friendly welcome." From that moment onwards, Neuven and Lampard did not appear as people in Thales' mind anymore, but were concepts of the common elected king and the archdukes, fighting against each other while representing their different authorities and statuses in the same societal structure. The archduke has his own reasons. Viscount Kentvida reacted to the situation quickly. He replied in a flat tone, "I believe that the archduke has told you before that no matter whether it is you or the archduke, both of you are in a perilous situation, and only when you cooperate in good faith with him." King Neuven hates him, right? Under Poutre's strange gaze, Thales interrupted Kentvida's words. Kentvida stopped speaking. His face was expressionless. "I guess that the affairs in Constellation's palace has already reached Dragon Cloud City. There might be no proof, but the Archduke of Black Sand cannot escape from being connected to Prince Mariah's death, and just like what that cold star killer said, Thales enunciated each of his words. King Neuven will deal with him sooner or later. And what does Lampard intend to do? Thales watched Kentvida's expression closely, wanting to find some clues from his face. Viscount Kentvida frowned slightly, then shook his head slowly. A strange smile appeared on his lips. He no longer used the polite and distant tone he employed when speaking to Thales, but used a serious and stern voice to answer him. Black Sand region stands at the border between Extit and Constellation. It has been in conflict with the Northern Territory for hundreds of years. It is not as weak as you imagined. And King Neuven, as well as the Walton family's power, still cannot reach Black Sand region. The Viscount's words carried a profound meaning. Besides, Extit employs a king selection system. A strange smile appeared on Kentvida's face. The Archduke is still young, and King Neuven. Thales narrowed his eyes slightly. How very confident, Chapman Lampard. He remembered the talk they had in Lampard's military camp. But only these sorts of people can be known as gamblers, and can make someone like Sonia Caesar, the fortress flower, wary of him, no. Good, because I, too, am still very young, Thales mumbled, though no one knew whether it was intentional or not. Kentvida stared at Thales. Before we left, the Archduke asked me to deliver a few words to you. Thales raised his head. Please do be careful in choosing your enemies and friends. Kentvida smiled once more and tapped his chest at the position right above his heart and said, being kind and compassionate is not a king's weakness. But not being wise in handling matters is a great taboo for a king. Thales frowned and let out a cold harumph. The second prince shook his head. Let his grace teach me those things after he becomes the king. Kentvida nodded. His smile did not change. I will bring your exact words back to him. At that moment. Those from Black Sand region, why haven't you left yet? Nicholas went to their side and asked rudely, what now? Do you still want to bring 2,000 men and do a little sightseeing in Dragon Cloud City? Marquis Shiles came to their side quietly and laughed. Don't mind him, I do think that Lord Nicholas speaks in a very unique manner. Do a little sightseeing. How would we dare do? This is, after all, the territory of the Dragon Spear family. It is also where the common elected king is, if his majesty is still as generous as ever and can provide us with some. Then hurry up and leave if you don't want to freeze to death in the day before the bitter cold winter. Nicholas's expression turned cold as he interrupted Kentvida. Unless you have Lampard come to this place personally. Then his majesty will not have the mood to be a good host to you. Kentvida's words died in his throat, and in the end, he did not continue speaking. He quickly bowed slightly and left with a calm expression. The army that spanned several hundreds of meters from Black Sand region followed behind him. For a short while, only the diplomat group and the White Blade Guards were left beside Thales. They were left to face the majestic Dragon Cloud City. Thales sighed. He turned his head around and looked at Dragon Cloud City, which was getting closer. Suddenly, a crease appeared between his brows. Thales stared at a stone bridge that connected through the entire upper portion of Dragon Cloud City. The stone bridge hung in the sky. At the other end of the bridge was a huge cliff. The cliff was flat and wide, unlike the other cliffs in Dragon Cloud City which were filled with buildings. While this cliff was not small, it was empty. He asked in puzzlement, why is that gigantic cliff so flat and empty? Also, that huge mountain cave behind it seems to be man-made. Thales narrowed his eyes and gazed into the distance. Shiles moved past several people and appeared in front of Thales. The Marquis from Camus Union looked at the giant cliff, then frowned and shook his head. That is the legendary Sky Cliff. I might have seen it a few times, but the story behind that place, I heard that the place is an area belonging exclusively to their queen. Their queen. While observing the cliff, Thales was momentarily stunned, and he instinctively asked, "What queen?" "What queen?" Nicholas turned his head around. There was a strange expression on his face, as if he was slightly displeased. "Are you joking?" Thales shrugged. He wanted to exchange a glance with Poutre, but the latter merely kept silent in a profound manner. At that moment, the attendant Wya, who had been silent for a long while, suddenly spoke up. "I have only heard some rumors about Dragon Cloud City's Sky Cliff. I heard that this is the royal pavilion belonging to the First Queen." First Queen? Thales' bewilderment grew deeper. He exhaled and looked at Nicholas. "Choosing a deserted and empty cliff as a royal pavilion? Is this asceticism?" "Just who is the queen?" Thales asked impatiently. "I thought Constellation's prince would at least have some knowledge in his head." Nicholas mocked him. "Of course it's the queen, of King Rikaru Extit, the savior of the Battle of Eradication, the greatest hero in human history, the founding king of Extit." Thales was completely stunned. Rikaru's queen. Thales frowned slightly. He raised his head and looked towards the cliff of the sky. "Hold on, a queen from 600 years ago?" "Yes," Nicholas nodded. His expression was solemn and respectful. "The first queen, whose existence is like a legend in Extit. During the Battle of Eradication, she was the most reliable existence beside King Rikaru. His comrade and his one true love. When he was crowned king, she became his eternal queen. She is also the most noble and most perfect symbol in the hearts of Northlanders throughout these 600 years." An expression of reverence appeared on Nicholas's face. The White Blade Guards might have their faces covered, but Thales could still tell that their emotions were the same as Nicholas's. The leader of the White Blade Guards continued faintly. "She might have left quietly after King Rikaru passed away and disappeared without a trace, but the legends and myths around her stayed within every single Extitian's heart." Nicholas softly said, "During the Battle of Eradication, she was the legendary Crimson Wings in blue flames on the battlefield. The Queen of the Sky, Queen Chlorosis." Thales frowned. "Why the sky? Could it be that the queen can fly?" "Hold on." Thales looked at the gigantic cliff, and his mouth fell open. "Can fly? Did you say, Crimson Wings in blue flames?" Thales turned his head around, and his face was deathly pale. With a flabbergasted expression, he stared at Nicholas. "The Queen of the Sky, which also means, she is." "Yes, that is right." Nicholas showed a rare smile. The pale man who was usually aloof and stern was filled with pride and glory in that moment. "During the Battle of Eradication, the great hero, King Rikaru Extit." Nicholas lifted his hand proudly and pointed at Extit's flag fluttering in the sky. "Was a knight." Thales turned his head around and stared at the black flag with a dumbfounded expression. The crimson dragon on it bared its fangs and brandished its claws in the face of the wind. With his one true love, the Queen of the Sky, they soared through the air and fought together, and he was. Nicholas's words traveled into his ears. A dragon knight. Translator's notes. 1. Pirate King. From the Pirates of the Caribbean, at World's End, only in it, Jack Sparrow voted for Elizabeth. Chapter 125 The Female Warrior. A small house in a village outside Dragon Cloud City. "It's been 3 years since I last saw you, Cohen and my dear Miranda. Did the tower send you here?" In a dark room, a girl with short hair lay on a wooden bed. Her name was Croche Merc, and she gave them a troubled yet peaceful smile. "It is truly the best consolation to see the both of you now." "Thank you, Uncle Caslin," the short-haired girl thanked Caslin, who was by her side without any emotion on her face. Miranda furrowed her brows tightly. Even the careless Cohen could not help but notice that the Northland girl, Croche, had changed drastically. She used to be in the same year as them. Compared to the high-spirited Croche Merc 3 years ago when they parted ways at the Tower of Eradication, not only was she a lot thinner, she also became gloomier than before. Previously, her determination was like a stamp engraved on her round face. It was unknown when it had turned into bitterness and disappointment. Cohen shifted his gaze to her hand, and his breathing stopped instantly. This girl from the tower who had a firm and determined look on her face, this girl who was assiduous in her training and never gave up easily. Her right hand, which she used to hold her sword, was currently tightly wrapped bandages. Croche, Cohen tried his best to avert his gaze from her right hand and forced a smile. Then, he cautiously and slowly said, "Are you, all right?" "All right." Just as he said that, Cohen had the urge to slap himself. Croche slowly looked at him without any emotions in her eyes. "I'm all right." Cohen was hurt by the girl's empty gaze. "It's just that my right hand, I can't use it to pick up my weapon anymore. That's all." Silence. Cohen was in an awkward situation and he did not know how to continue the conversation. Damn it, if only Raphael was here. Comforting others has always been that white-cloaked brat's strength. As expected, Miranda walked forward and rolled her eyes at Cohen. Then, like numerous times in the past, she did not bat an eyelid when she fiercely stepped on the foot of the innocent-looking Cohen. Cohen took a sharp breath due to the pain. While Cohen was grimacing in pain, Miranda sat on the side of Croche's bed. Her expression remained unchanged when she opened her mouth in resolution. "Who did this?" Any form of consolation is useless now, Miranda thought to herself. Might as well go straight to the point, so that I don't have to think about meaningless matters. At the side, Caslin let out a fake cough. The former leader of the White Blade Guards did not have too much to say when facing Croce. He had seen too many retired soldiers face the same situation before. Caslin sighed deeply to himself. Those soldiers would never know how fortunate it actually was to be injured and retired. Croce came to her senses and put on a strained smile. I believe you already have some knowledge on the beginning and end of the incident. Croce managed to recover her calm tone, and she did not sound like a swordswoman who had just lost all hope in using her sword anymore. A military officer named Thales, who lurked in the Black Sand region's army, almost assassinated your prince in the fortress by using a mystic gun. Cohen nodded. I witnessed that scene at Broken Dragon Fortress, but I did not see it clearly. I thought that it was just a demonstrative test fire, Miranda quietly replied. Oh, right, Miranda, you're currently the capable subordinate of Constellation's Fortress Flower, am I right? Croce smiled at her former cohort and immediately glanced at her right hand. Her expression fell when she uttered the next word. Congratulations. Miranda had a flat expression on her face and she did not say a word. She only reached her hand out in silence to hold Croce's left hand tightly. Croce trembled slightly when she felt the temperature from Miranda's hand. About that, arg. Miranda remained expressionless when she elbowed Cohen, who was scratching his ears and cheeks. He was just about to speak and her actions made his words die in his mouth. Cohen continued to grimace quietly with an anguished expression on his face. At the same time, he continued to protest against Miranda with his gaze. Do you really have to be like this? Croce could not help but laugh at the sight. This scene reminded her of their past in the Tower of Eradication. Caslin crossed his arms and looked at Miranda approvingly. Such an attentive and considerate girl. She managed to unconsciously alleviate Croce's mood. This girl from the Arun family just looks a little cold on the surface. It would be so much better if she could smile more. According to the Archduke's instructions, we managed to track down Officer Hadel's point of contact for firearms. Croce struggled to maintain her smile as she continued. They sold the parts of the military mystic guns Hadel removed and were supposed to be destroyed to the south and west. Hadel thereby exchanged even more funds and used said funds on the unit's training as well as forming contacts. The Archduke's mystic gun unit could possibly be controlled by those people in a few years' time. Fortunately, we discovered this at an early stage and intercepted that point of contact for his underground firearms trade. That military officer, what did you manage to find out about him? Miranda asked with a gentle voice. Not much, Croce said faintly. Hadel came from a small village located farther up north. The territory belongs to Archduke Lecco of Defense City. 11 or 12 years ago, he experienced the war between Exted and Constellation. While he managed to survive the disastrous attack in defense battle, he lost a hand and half of his face under the bombardment of the mystic gun. Miranda's face went pale. Once again, it was the war 12 years ago. Cohen sighed and walked forward. He cautiously avoided Miranda's attack range with her bare hands and asked slowly, Archduke of Defense City, one of the two archdukes in the north of Exted. The Lecco family, so, Archduke Lecco was the person behind the conspiracy to murder the Prince of Constellation with the help of the mystic gun. Croce shook her head. It's not that simple. After the battle, Hadel arrived in Black Sand region and stayed until this day. He did not have any contact with any people related to Defense City, so we can't be sure that it was him. But, there was something that made us extremely suspicious. We interrogated Hadel's contact for the firearms and discovered there was one time when Hadel incidentally mentioned that he had a daughter called Lucy. Cohen's eyes glinted. You found his daughter. Were there any problems with her? It's not merely a problem. Croce pursed her lips together and shook her head. More like, this person does not exist at all. Does not exist? Cohen asked in confusion. Hadel has stayed single for the past 40 years. We received confirmation from his neighbor that he did not have a wife or a lover at all, much less any children, Croce replied faintly. We followed this name, Lucy, and continued to investigate. We discovered that he had mentioned Lucy to more than one person. From Black Sand region's firearms black market to Prestige Orchid region's transportation team. When the trail led us to Dragon Cloud City, we encountered an interception. The girl with short hair lifted her head and revealed a terrifying expression on her face. A group of strange swordsmen appeared. Miranda furrowed her brows. The disaster sword. Croce lowered her eyelids and nodded. What were they like? How many people were there? Cohen's expression changed. He ignored Miranda's dissatisfied expression and rushed to ask his questions. What type of power of eradication were they using? How did you recognize that they were the disaster sword? Silently listening by the side, Caslin furrowed his brows. They had a great number of people with them and they covered their heads as well as their faces. Besides, it was at night, so I couldn't see their figures and appearances clearly. But their power of eradication, it was just as Teacher Chartier had described, Croce replied faintly, cold and ruthless. The power of eradication was violently surging and never ending. I am the only person who survived and came back alive. Cohen was stunned. However, he immediately reacted. Is there any more information? When and where did they appear? For example, the way they attacked. I already told Uncle Caslin the specific information on their appearance. Croce could only clench her teeth and shake her head with a bitter look in her eyes. Go and complete your mission regardless of whether it's for the Tower of Eradication, or your Prince of Constellation. Cohen still wanted to ask her more, but Miranda held his arm and shook her head at him. I'm tired, Croce said softly. She slowly turned over and turned her face to face the wall. I want to rest for a while. Cohen and Miranda exchanged glances between them, then looked at Croce. Finally, under Caslin's gaze, they bid their farewells and left. Cohen. Before they left, Croce suddenly called out and stopped the Constellation policeman. Cohen was stunned when he turned around. She was seen turning her head around and lifting her eyelids. In her eyes were unexplainable, complex emotions. You. Be careful. Cohen was momentarily stunned before he was immediately pulled out from the room by Caslin. You've seen her current state. To be honest, based on my observation, I do not think that she is injured to the point where she can't use her sword anymore. It's her own mental obstacles that prevent her from using the sword again, Caslin said faintly. What do you mean, mental obstacles? Miranda furrowed her brows and asked. Croce is the daughter of an old subordinate of mine in the White Blade Guards. Caslin followed the two young people out of the house. He looked at the Dragon Cloud City in the far distance and shook his head. Both of you knew her from the Tower of Eradication, so you should know that she has great aspirations. I guess it is also something you constellations instill. Hey, Cohen objected, what are you trying to imply when you say that it's something we constellations instill? Croce has always been. Caslin ignored him and muttered to himself. She has been very strong-minded since a young age and she always wanted to become a legendary female knight like the Heart of the Rain. Heart of the Rain, Lorraine. From what I've heard, was she Great Master Shao's cohort as well as yours? Cohen asked with much curiosity, was she the mercenary who bore the flag for Hanbol's inheritance war? Yes, Caslin paused slightly while he reminisced, as if some past events had been evoked in his mind. Then, his face broke into a smile as he said, there will always be some women that you won't dare to offend in your lifetime. Immediately afterwards, the old, ground shaker Caslin sighed. After experiencing the Tower of Eradication's training, Croce became even more ambitious. When she returned, she even recommended herself for the White Blade Guard's appraisal, relaying her desire to join. Miranda lifted her head and revealed a burning gaze. But she did not succeed. Caslin raised his eyebrow. The White Blade Guards rejected her, and it was a huge blow to her. Miranda showed her confusion. A huge blow. As far as I know, the White Blade Guards have a very high standard when it comes to their selection criteria. The rejection itself was not a big blow. Caslin interrupted her and turned his head around. It was the reason behind the rejection. Reason behind the rejection? Miranda stared intently at him. What was it? Caslin took a breath, but he did not answer. I know, Cohen was the one who replied just as Miranda was about to voice up. The police officer sighed, it's because she's a woman, right? Caslin glanced at Miranda in a seemingly meaningful manner and nodded. Correct. Because she's a woman. Miranda clenched her teeth subconsciously. Caslin sneered, many people have said that we Northlanders are very valiant. Even women and children can pick up their weapons when they are fierce and angry, but according to my wife, many Northlanders still believe that matters regarding territory, politics, war and inheritance of nobles' titles belong to men. Women should stay at home and wait for their husband's return. With that, Croce brought her sword along and turned to every suzerain, but she was rejected everywhere. A woman who went through the complete Tower of Eradication's training and a super-class swordswoman was unable to obtain a position, not even from one of the counts. There were a few viscounts and barons who were willing to take her in, but the condition was that she had to marry them after her contract ended. Without a doubt, they offered her a position because her father was in the White Blade Guards. Miranda lightly held on to the hilt of her sword, which was by her waist. Compared to my smooth journey in Constellation, my father's care and Sonia's protection, this was what Croce faced in Northland and encountered in Extit. According to her father, Croce even considered heading southwest to Thornland or Dragon Kiss Basin, or even the Great Desert to become a mercenary. But in the end, she arrived in Black Sand region. Borrowing her father's name, she went to my worthless nephew. In his territory, she got a position under a viscount named Kenvida. Caslin sighed. I suspected that this was one of the methods Chapman Lampod used to rope me in, but seeing Croce's state. Plus, this time. Caslin shook his head. Anyway, now you know the reason why, Arun's little girl. The old man lifted his gaze to look at Miranda. The way you dress is, to be honest, really too conspicuous in Northland. Miranda did not utter a word and only stared at Dragon Cloud City, located far away. When I was in the western front lines, there were also some female soldiers, because there would sometimes be a shortage of soldiers, Cohen slowly said. Because of various reasons like lacking the means to live, many female soldiers from the Suicide Squad were enlisted in the army. Many of them were female mercenaries who came from various countries in the southwest, but they were, usually not welcomed. Cohen's eyes were glistening when he said, their natural strength and weight endurance were weaker than that of men. Not to mention, the specific requirements for the style of their upper body armor and their absolutely disadvantageous height, these were usually very deadly factors when facing the orcs. Because you had to leap into the air to be able to attack their vital organs. Of course, there is also the monthly, you know. Cohen lowered his head and furrowed his brows. Their status in the military camp was very low. Sometimes, they had to resort to pleasing their commanding officers and comrades. And once they fell into the hands of the enemy, especially the hands of the Baron Bone people, their endings were usually a lot more tragic than men's. So, whenever the shock brigade chooses soldiers, even I would usually avoid the female soldiers. Miranda still remained silent. I guess this is more or less the White Blade Guard's consideration. Caslin sighed. It's one matter to learn sword skills in the Tower of Eradication, but, naturally, females are unsuitable for the battlefield. Excuses. Miranda lifted her head abruptly and snorted coldly. You men can only see the disadvantages of female soldiers in the battlefield, and purposely overlook their advantages. Advantages? Caslin furrowed his brows. Cohen raised his eyebrow helplessly. At an angle away from Miranda's gaze, he spread his arms in front of Caslin. Lesser energy consumption than males, patience that far surpasses that of male, nimbleness, suppleness and strength that exceed the limits of your imagination, meticulous and sharp power of observation, the ability to stay calm in the face of a tense situation. These are all advantages that females possess, Miranda said indignantly. Even if you want to compare with strength and height, just take the Kingdom's Wrath as an example. I witnessed it with my own eyes, his height and strength could not compare with Lady Sonia. Besides, we have the power of eradication. I am also a woman, Miranda said coldly. In the Tower of Eradication, I was stronger than you, than Raphael, than Missadon, than every single one of the cohorts. On top of that, let's not forget the legendary Valkyrie, the Heart of the Rain, Knight Lorraine from 20 years ago. Cohen awkwardly coughed a couple of times. Look, Uncle also mentioned earlier that the battlefield was another matter. You can't just take some special person to serve as comparison. The police officer spread his hand helplessly. The Heart of the Rain was an exception. Lady Sonia is also a legendary individual under the Duke of Star Lake. And you, Miranda, are the daughter of the Arun family. Since you were born, you've been trained to be a warrior, suzerain and commander. Just as Cohen finished this sentence, Miranda directed her murderous gaze towards him and he felt the coldness penetrate into his heart. It also cut off the next half of the speech in his throat. I think the Western Desert and Northland are comparatively unique. Caslin let out a snort of laughter. The Western Desert has been on the front lines, in a state of turmoil and chaos for years on end. Whereas, Northland's view on females have existed for a long time. I am also a Northlander. Miranda refuted with a cold look on her face. Old Caslin brought them towards the stable, and two people who looked like soldiers bowed before him. You are Constellation's Northlander, and you are also an Arund. Your family even allows females to inherit the title of Duke. I also remember that you had a queen a few hundred years ago. Caslin sighed. As for Northland, to accept a female knight, female suzerain, or even a queen. There is still a long way to go before we reach that state. No, even in Constellation, female suzerains are still looked down upon by the others, Miranda silently said to herself. A few hundred years ago, Constellation's queen did not have a good ending either. Miranda lifted her head and revealed her firm gaze. The day will arrive where female warriors, swordswomen and even queens are no longer the minority. We will prove to the world that what men can do, women can do as well. Caslin shrugged and walked into the stable. Cohen stuck his tongue out and sighed helplessly when he thought of his two devilish, younger sisters back home. Miranda, how could Raphael like her? Cohen's mood became heavier when he thought about Raphael, his current position and the power of eradication in him. In order to escort the prince, the Black Sand region's army is currently staying in a village nearby Dragon Cloud City. They will bring Croche back with them. Caslin pulled along two horses and looked at the young, noble swordsman as well as swordswoman. I will hand over the following mission to you. Are you not coming along? Cohen raised his eyebrow. My appearance there is not a good idea. Caslin's expression fell. It will alarm too many people. Caslin handed the reins over to Cohen and Miranda. Fortunately, I still know some of the personnel in Dragon Cloud City. I have a few old friends and they can provide you with information. But in terms of the specific investigation and inquiries, to recognize the disaster sword from the sword of eradication, no one is better or more proficient than the both of you. You are the seeds of this particular batch in the Tower of Eradication. It doesn't matter if it's the inborn observational skills you possess as nobles, your superclass combat abilities, which are suitable for the battlefield, or your response to the disaster swords. You know some personnel in Dragon Cloud City. Cohen looked at him suspiciously. Uncle, didn't you open a tavern in Black Sand region for 20 years? Ah, that. Caslin touched his gray hair awkwardly. Anyway, I did stay in Dragon Cloud City for many years previously. Can contacts from 20 years ago still be reliable? Cohen furrowed his brows. We always keep in touch. Caslin glanced left and right, then gave out a mischievous chuckle. Also, For a long time now, many of my old subordinates from the White Blade Guard stayed in Dragon Cloud City after they retired. I helped them when they were searching for a living. Searching for a living, you helped them. Cohen's confusion became even stronger. When some of the retired soldiers were not doing well, I pulled some strings for them, I found some jobs for them. Caslin coughed unnaturally. You know, there are always some jobs that need people who know how to battle. Just say that you introduced them to the gang. Miranda had a look of disdain on her face. It will be easier for us to understand. Caslin started to cough loudly to drown out Miranda's words. These past 10 years, that gang of yours in Constellation, that something brotherhood of yours has caused a real ruckus. They even expanded their business to Dragon Cloud City. A couple of old friends were always lacking manpower and they wanted me to introduce some people to them, so. What? Cohen widened his eyes. After all of that, Uncle, you are actually the middleman of Dragon Cloud City's gang. Caslin's coughing became louder and louder. Under the suspicious gazes of the two young people, he lifted his head with a sense of righteousness and patted them on their shoulders. In short, regardless of whether it's the Tower of Eradication's mission, or just to give Krosh an explanation, or even find the truth behind the assassination attempt on Constellation's prince, I will just hand over the mission to you. One of them revealed a look of disdain whereas the other shook his head as he clicked his tongue. Remember, your mission is only to investigate. Do not give away your life for unverified news. Before their departure, Caslin became solemn. But both of you have the ability to come into contact with the disaster sword, and even survive in their hands. As long as you do not encounter swordsmen of the supreme class, I believe in your strength. The two of them exchanged glances and nodded seriously. My people will help you, but if the matter blows up, remember to conceal yourselves. Even though your prince is currently on a diplomatic trip to Exted and the tension between the two countries has been greatly decreased by his arrival, you are Constellations, family members of Constellation's nobles to top it all off. So, it is still not a good thing to hastily expose your identities there. Other than that, what both of you need to mind and worry about isn't as simple as the sword on the surface. Caslin narrowed his eyes. It is very likely that Disaster Sword is working together with one of Exted's suzerains, like some archduke for example. Intentionally joining forces with a suzerain and carrying out the act of assassinating Constellation's prince, I am afraid their motives aren't simple. I get it. Cohen inhaled and mounted a horse. We'll look for inside information and the truth, whether it's about assassinating the prince or harming the Tower of Eradication. Miranda did not say much. She lightly nodded her head and directly left on her horse. Cohen followed closely after. Caslin stared at their leaving figures and looked at Dragon Cloud City in the far distance. His eyes glinted in fond recollection. That year, I also stepped into Dragon Cloud City from here. Chapter 126 Heroic Spirit Palace. When Thales finally stepped into Dragon Cloud City, the rough yet bold and extravagant architectural style was not what immediately caught his attention. In contrast to Eternal Star City's buildings that were constructed by relying on the city district and city wall, this city was built on a gentle slope at the mountain peak. The layout of the city was built according to the mountain's topography. It stretched up the mountain, allowing it to appear natural and smooth. The experience was similar to the one Thales had in Lampard's military camp. What also left Thales with a great impression was the Extians, who crowded around the city gate to watch the Prince of Constellation. It seemed like they were there to witness the fun. A prince belonging to the citizens of the Empire. A hoarse voice shouted in the crowd. This immediately initiated a noisy and chaotic response. According to Poutre, the place was supposed to be filled with commoners who were busy preparing to get themselves through the winter. They would be going into the city to exchange, sell and purchase materials for the very last time. Unfortunately, he had arrived at this particular time. Thales could only lower his head and sigh. It had been a long time since he was this popular. Even though the commoners' attitude was a lot better than the soldiers, and the Extians were not filled with as much hatred towards Constellation as Black Sand region was, it was obvious that the news of Dragon Cloud City's heir being attacked by assassins in Constellation had spread out for some time. This resulted in Thales and his companions going through a similar experience once again. From discussing to hurling abusive words and even throwing garbage at them, Extians were much more enthusiastic compared to Constellations. If that king has guts, then don't send. A furious and agitated voice rose up from the crowd. Thales could not see its owner clearly. He was quickly escorted away by the attendants before Thales got to listen to the second half of the scolding. He could vaguely hear a voice saying, "Let that coward come personally," as well as numerous responses of agreement and refutation behind him. Maintain order and separate the crowd. We need to arrive at Heroic Spirit Palace as soon as possible. Nicholas reprimanded his subordinates and soldiers in a rude manner. You know what to do with those people who charged and collided into us of their own free will. Fortunately, the White Blade guards and soldiers of Dragon Cloud City were there to separate the crowd. Otherwise, the Prince of Constellation would have to flee into Dragon Cloud City in a disheveled manner. Although there was not much difference at this point. Their offended expressions, Thales looked at Wya and Ralph, who were on guard as if they were facing a great enemy. He sighed helplessly on the horse. It's as if I'm the one who murdered their prince. Put yourself in their shoes and think for a moment, Putre yelled in the clamorous environment. If you die in Northland today, and then the next day, Extit sends someone to Eternal Star City to apologize, I believe, I will probably have that offended look on my face too. Thales rolled his eyes at Putre, but the latter seemed to pay no attention to the prediction he had just made for the prince. Thank you for your auspicious words, Vice Diplomat, Thales replied sourly. If you lose your job in the future, I suggest that you go and try your luck in the Western Desert. I believe Duke Fakenhas will surely get along with you. Is he that master of the four-eyed skull, that unpopular guardian duke of the Western Desert? Putre sneered. Thank you for your recommendation. Thales had no choice but to snort coldly in reply. But they both knew that the real test was not here, not where these simple people were. Are you ready, citizen of the Empire? Nicholas's voice came through from the front and his voice was stained with disdain. This will be very tiring. What? Thales was stunned when he lifted his head. However, he quickly knew the reason why. Dragon Cloud City was built according to the topography and slope of the mountain, with its buildings constructed on separate layers. It basically spiraled upwards. They had no choice but to climb up the slope throughout the whole journey in the city. They passed layer upon layer of barriers separated by the thick inner city gatehouses. There was an inner city gatehouse between each district, and altogether, there were about 7 or 8 gatehouses. I have heard about Dragon Cloud City's layout before. Wya clenched his teeth and observed his surroundings vigilantly. It is said that this type of inner city structure is better at protecting the city itself. Even if the enemy breaches Dragon Cloud City's main gate, the archers on the city walls and city gates can still turn around and carry out layered attacks on the enemy who charges into the city. Also, the warriors are able to block the enemy's waves of attacks behind the city gatehouses. And because of the slope, the invaders have no choice but to face a disadvantageous situation, where they have to attack from below. I dare say that this type of layout helped them greatly during the Third Peninsular War when they were facing the besiegement from the Eastern Peninsular's army. So, this city is also not inferior in any respect compared to the Broken Dragon Fortress. Thales stared helplessly at the horse that sat down and panted. The noisy onlookers outside of the guard separation line also caused him to become distraught and annoyed. Even the city residents need to climb the slope when they wish to take a stroll, what more the enemies who attack the city. On top of that, the nobles also have an excuse or reason to hide and cower in the city. Ida walked on the stone tiles with her graceful and lithe figure, but she still snorted lightly in dissatisfaction. They allow their people outside of the city to endure the sufferings. I think, the first batch of people built this city purely out of military purpose. However, no one expected that it would one day become Extit's capital. Thales glanced at the passers-by who either walked by or stopped walking. Don't the people who live here feel tired? To some degree, this city also naturally repels businessmen. This type of layout is not suitable for both peddling and opening stores, regardless of whether it is to transport goods or expand business. Can you imagine the cost to transport 1 load of firewood up to the inner city? It's enough to carry 3 loads of firewood to other places. The Marquis of Camus Union, Shiles seemed like he was getting used to this type of road, but he still shook his head and appeared to be speechless when he said, of course, this is when we, the Camions, stepped in. So, the higher grounds of the inner city are places that only people with more power live in. Am I right? Thales sighed. The differentiation of social classes is really clear, straightforward and easy to understand. With Putre's introduction compared to a few years ago, there may not have been any huge changes. In fact, I suspect that Dragon Cloud City has not changed much at all in the past 100 years, said Putre. On their journey, they passed by many districts that were entirely different from one another. There was Shield District, which looked like the slums, Hammer District, where the commoners lived, Sword District, where the bazaar and plaza were located, Bow District, which seemed to have an assortment of buildings, Arrow District, where the temples and places of worship were gathered, Spear District, where the departments such as the court and prison were located, the Armor District, where the workshops and shops converged, and the Axe District, where the nobles were located. Why did they not build another section and named it the Mystic Gun District? Thales was infuriated when he ridiculed the city districts, which were all named after various weapons. I think the Mystic Gun was not yet invented when Rikaru named and rebuilt Dragon Cloud City, Putre replied nonchalantly. Then, when was the Mystic Gun invented? Thales asked out of curiosity. Who invented it? Why was it named that way? The Mystic Gun has been around for almost 300 years and its spare parts are very easy to obtain. Putre seemed to know what Thales intended to ask, but it almost appeared like he was intentionally defying Thales when he laughed. Only the part at its innermost core needs to be obtained from strategic resources. About its origin, you will find out sooner or later. As for the naming, nobody knows about that too. Thales twitched his mouth. Mystic Gun. Mystics. Mystic energy. Magic. He suppressed the doubts in his mind and tried hard to shift his focus to the current matter. All right, truly, the Extitians were lacking in imagination when they named these city districts. Also, I have a suggestion for them if they run out of ideas to name their city districts. When he saw his steed climbing up the slope with much hardship, Thales could not help but feel weary in his heart. He sighed as he said, "The legendary anti-mystic equipment district. If you ask me, you have been jabbering non-stop since just now." Poutre finally took out his tobacco pipe. He glanced at Thales with a slightly meaningful gaze and revealed the truth after he deeply inhaled a mouthful of smoke. "Is it because of the situation that you are about to face that makes you anxious?" Thales was suddenly speechless. Go to hell. Under the watchful gaze of the diplomatic group's other members, Thales kept his mouth shut in embarrassment. They finally climbed out of the last road in Axe district. No matter where they went, that double cross-shaped star's flag behind Thales was the biggest target for spectators. The flag with a sky-blue base was held by Gennard, and everywhere on their journey, people crowded around to see Thales. The soldiers of Dragon Cloud City who were tasked to maintain order practically could not bear the heavy burden. The Northlanders' naturally loud voice and fiery temperament also caused the scene to be even more chaotic. This did not give Thales a chance to carefully observe Dragon Cloud City's appearance at all. He was swiftly escorted all the way to the highest part of the inner city by the White Blade Guards. The city gatehouse then closed and blocked the tide of people outside. Thales furrowed his brows and took a deep breath. With Wya's help, he got off the horse, stepped onto the black stone tiles of Northland, which were crude and hard. Then, he slowly lifted his head. Before his eyes was a palace. So, that is, Thales was stunned as he thought to himself. "Allow me to bid my farewell to you here, dear Prince Thales." Before he had time to carefully observe the palace, Marquis Shiles of Camus Union came before him and humbly bowed down as he whispered, "You must mentally prepare yourself." Camus Union's Marquis let out a mischievous chuckle. "According to the plan, King Nuven's treatment towards you may be a little cruel." Thales gave him an awkward smile. He took a deep breath of cold air and nodded. "Cruel? Of course." Thales rolled his eyes in secret. "Ever since I came to this world, was there anyone who treated me in a gentle manner? This feels like a novel that oppresses its protagonist, okay." Marquis Shiles and Nicholas exchanged glances, after which they led Camus Union's men and horses to leave in another direction. Just as Thales was about to lift his head and take a good look at the palace, which may possibly be Extit's royal palace, the palace gates slowly opened. A group of Northlanders filed out from the palace gates. Their attires were magnificent and neat, but they were still fully armed. Thales involuntarily tensed up in secret. As expected, a loud and clear voice rose up from the group of people. "In the name of the common elected King of Extit, King Nuven Walton VII. I hereby welcome our foreign guests under the King's order." A cold-looking, muscular man with a buzzcut pursed his lips at Thales and squinted his eyes to scrutinize him for a few seconds. "The king looks forward to your arrival," he faintly said, "Prince of Constellation." Thales clenched his fists tightly. "Here it comes." Nicholas guffawed and walked forward to embrace the person who led the group. "Dear head of the guards, did you complete the mission, my friend?" the man asked in a soft voice that seemed to imply a deep meaning. Of course, Nicholas also implied something different when he said, "The Prince of Constellation whom we wanted is already here." Thales furrowed his brows as he watched the communication between the two of them. Then, the leading man with a buzzcut approached Thales and bowed before him. "Welcome to Extit, and her most resplendent and splendid pearl, Dragon Cloud City, Prince Thales from Constellation." Thales recalled Gilbert's teachings and Poutre's advice on the journey here, so he immediately returned the greeting with a smile. He seems like some bureaucrat, but his physique seems more like a warrior. Thales thought. Or should I say, almost all Northland men look like warriors. "I am Lord Byrne Merk." The Northlander with the buzzcut was about 40 or 50 years old. He was dressed in a thick robe and he had a serious expression on his face. "Before I got my title, I was once a member of the White Blade Guards. I am currently King Nuven's administrator and I am in charge of arranging all matters regarding your reception in Dragon Cloud City." "Thank you for your reception, Lord Merk." Thales nodded and secretly confirmed his own judgment. "Allow me to introduce you to this place as this is your first time here." Merk turned around with a serious expression and raised his hand to gesture towards the majestic palace. "This has been the residence of the suzerains in Northland from the ancient times until today, from the ramshackle building on the mountain during the era of the feudal kings, to the stone fortress during the age of the empire, and finally to the majestic palace it is today. For a few thousand years, it witnessed the history of Northland and the emergence of Extit. It also saw the children of Northern Wind and Dragon prosper, flourish and grow endlessly." Merk then solemnly said the following words, "Heroic Spirit Palace." Heroic Spirit Palace. Is the meaning of its name really suitable for a living suzerain to reside in it? Thales was momentarily stunned, and then he slowly raised his head. It was a huge palace. Simple in style, but it had heavy colors. Its layout was imposing, but the design was crude. It was built according to the mountain, nonetheless counting from the inner city ground he stepped on, the palace was still almost 8 or 9 stories in height. Its building materials were also quite unique. They included huge trees, rough stones, hides and metals, so much so that much of the area was finished with a crude polish. The typical Northland style, vigorous and powerful, bold and unruly. Before the huge palace gates were 10 corridor pillars, which were over 10 meters in height. They were basically supporting the towering palace roof. The corridor pillars were engraved with stories of Northland heroes of past dynasties. The engravings were simple, but bold. Along the road from the inner city to the palace gates were 8 furnaces. They were a few meters tall and they were still burning even in broad daylight. It seemed like they illuminated the small plaza in front of the palace gate all day long. Their surrounding was filled with the tall, fierce-looking white blade guards and Dragon Cloud City's guards. Different from Constellation's guards who were orderly and strictly distributed, the standing position of Extit's guards appeared to be scattered. They did not seem to have discipline in terms of patrolling, but under Ida's reminder, Thales discovered that they were only lax when it came to defenses in the outer layer. Defenses were tight in the inner layer and they left absolutely no blind spots. Compared to Constellation's Renaissance Palace, which had a rather creative appearance, it looked like half a pyramid. Dragon Cloud City's royal palace seemed more like a majestic palace from a story, from its architectural style to the allocation of personnel inside. The red dragon flag with a black base was fluttering high above the palace. Below the fluttering flag, there was another flag, a dragon spear that pierced out from the clouds, Walton's emblem. It was the flag of Cloud Dragon Spear. Red and black, coupled with natural snowfall. In that moment, Thales felt like there were no other palaces more suitable for heroic spirits to return to. Thales shook his head. The heroic spirits palace is truly worthy of its name. As for the suzerains, archdukes and the king who live here. Right at this very moment, Thales' gaze was suddenly averted by something on the highest part of the palace. He could not help lifting his head up. A stone bridge extended from the highest level of the palace, high up in the air to another mountain peak. Thales' gaze was fixed upon it. It was that stone bridge. The stone bridge that led to the cliff of the sky, the royal pavilion of the Queen of the Sky. Only then did he notice a huge statue standing at the starting point of the stone bridge. Probably due to his field of view, the statue was not obvious from afar. It was a huge, black stone statue of a male warrior. The warrior looked heroic as well as majestic and he was holding an extremely long spear in his hands. The warrior with a robust build was neatly dressed in armor and appeared imposing when he looked down upon the heroic spirit palace from its higher ground. Thales thought to himself, surely, from that angle, he can take in the whole scene of Dragon Cloud City at once. Lord Merk, who was in charge of the reception, was very patient. All the while, he silently waited for the foreign prince until he noticed Thales' gaze. That is the stone bridge that leads to the cliff of the sky and above it is the statue of Rikaru I. It was built after Rikaru passed away more than 600 years ago. Merk lifted his head and introduced the statue seriously. It was just renovated a week ago. Thales' expression then became intense. That is, he stared at the stone statue of the brave man. The hero of the human race during the Battle of Eradication. He is one of the people who defeated the Calamity and the Mystics. The founder and first king of Extit. Rikaru Extit. The statue of the warrior was covered in snow. His motion of holding the spear was full of strength and it gave out a sense of building that was brimming with tension. Surely for the past 600 years, Rikaru overlooked his people, his land as well as his nation with a firm expression and a deep gaze. Thales nodded lightly in response to Merk. A cloud floated by and the direction of the sun's ray changed a little. From afar, the expression of the Extitian hero seemed to change from that of determination to grief. Thales narrowed his eyes and secretly sighed in admiration of the sculpture's craftsmanship 600 years ago. It was just renovated a week ago. Was it done to welcome me? That is unlikely. Maybe the Extitians are still waiting for the great dragon queen of legend, who disappeared without a trace after the Battle of Eradication. Are they waiting for her to come back and visit her husband's statue? Are they waiting for her to pay a visit to this nation that still keeps her portrait on the flag? Or perhaps, for her to watch over the Western Peninsular's blade, which she left behind together with Rikaru? There is a room already prepared for you in the Heroic Spirit Palace. This will temporarily be your accommodation during your time in Dragon Cloud City. Merk gestured towards the palace gate to indicate Thales to move forward. Thales gave him a smile. Of course, I thank you for King Nuven's reception. For now, please come with me. The man with the busket had on the same expression, but what he said made the hearts of everyone from the Constellation diplomat group sink. King Nuven and 5 archdukes are currently in the Hall of Heroes, waiting for your arrival. Thales exchanged glances with Poutre. It was about to begin. However, just as Thales, Poutre and Ida prepared to take a step forward, Merk raised his hand lightly and stopped the slim vice diplomat. The prince's attendants, please follow my subordinate and proceed towards your rooms in advance, Merk said in a soft voice. I do not understand. Poutre stopped in his tracks and calmly looked at Merk. I am the prince's assistant for this trip and I have to remain by his side. I understand your obligation, Merk was expressionless as he slowly said, but there is a limitation to this invitation. This is a respectable and distinguished conversation from suzerain to suzerain, royal family to royal family. Jadastar to Walton and the 5 great clans. The king and the 5 archdukes only wish to see the prince himself, just as the prince will also only see the king and the 5 archdukes. Hence, please attend the meeting by yourself, Prince of Constellation. Thales' expression changed. Face Nuven the 7th and the 5 archdukes, alone. Poutre said faintly, as far as I know, this is not the usual etiquette for relations between our 2 countries. Even though they had already reached a preliminary agreement with King Nuven, they could never risk the prince's safety. Constellation had learned enough from this aspect. This is a very critical period. Merc shook his head. You want us to hand over the only heir of Constellation, give up on protecting him and place him isolated and helpless under your control. Poutre cleverly pointed out the most crucial point. Behind Thales, Ida, Wya, Ralph and the rest started to become anxious. They unconsciously reached for the weapons within their reach. On the other hand, Nicholas raised his hand slightly and the white blade guards surrounded them. The Star Killer was becoming increasingly paler. Just as you've said before, you still do not have many choices. Am I right, young prince? Thales narrowed his eyes. Please believe me, this is necessary. Merc stared at Thales with a burning gaze. Also, speaking of being isolated and helpless, pardon me for speaking bluntly. The moment you all walked into Extit's border, were you not already isolated and helpless? Thales sighed softly. Poutre did not say another word. This made the prince realize that this hunting partnership between him and Nuven had already started. All right. King Nuven, who is reportedly very cruel, Thales secretly smiled in a tranquil and calm manner. Let us wait and see. Under Poutre's ashen face and Merc's changing expression, Thales suppressed the uneasy feeling in his heart and smiled. Very well, I cannot wait to meet King Nuven. Thales turned around and looked at the people who went on the journey with him. He nodded and said, do not worry. I will be back soon. After he finished talking, Thales took a step forward. His small figure walked towards Heroic Spirit Palace, which had a totally different style. Yet, it was as serene and tranquil as Renaissance Palace. Chapter 127 The Born King 1. You guys came at the right time. Everyone went to see that prince from Constellation and there aren't many people around. We don't have to worry about being discovered. I like you, man. Beside a residential house in Dragon Cloud City, a short and stout man put his arm around Cohen Carabane's shoulders and laughed. Even without Caslin's recommendation, I can see that you are a good youngster. Only those who were in the army have such a physique. Miranda walked quietly behind them and watched as Cohen socialized with Caslin's friend by himself. Cohen responded without a hint of unfamiliarity, fully utilizing his experience from being on the front lines for 3 years and mingling with simple-minded soldiers. Same for you, big leather belt, look at those muscles, you definitely don't seem like you have retired from the military. Cohen also responded with a bold and unrestrained laugh. Anyway, how did you get this nickname? Caslin never told me about it. About this, it was something that happened while I was in the glacial sentries. The man who was nicknamed Big Leather Belt changed his expression when he heard Cohen's words. His face was filled with pride. I was still a new recruit at that time. Once, during the autumn harvest, we were met with a surprise attack at night. Oh, you were an elite scout from the glacial sentries. Cohen put on a surprised expression. No wonder, speaking of this, you must have fought quite a lot against the orcs. Not only that, Big Leather Belt laughed with pride. After serving in the 38th Century Ground for 10 years, me and my brothers in the squad killed 52 orcs in total. Cohen was in awe. Orcs, these, ancient enemies, who had battled with humans since the barbaric era. They are not easy opponents. Back on how my nickname came about, I was on duty during my first battle when 5 or 6 orcs sneaked into the sentry ground. Big Leather Belt shook his head. We met one head on. That son of AB*TCH was FC King Ugly. It was around 8 feet tall, and its wrists were even thicker than my thighs. That son of AB*TCH killed 3 of our brothers and was quite heavily wounded. I was the last one standing and had been beaten up so badly that my weapons were breaking, Big Leather Belt said as he beamed with joy, hitting his chest hard every now and then. At that time, I felt that there was no other way. So I just whipped out the customized belt used by sentries, jumped onto its shoulders, and then... Big Leather Belt clenched his teeth as he spoke and grabbed Cohen's neck with force. Just like this, I made a knot and strangled its neck hard. Cohen held his neck and coughed vigorously, feeling the effects of the other's overenthusiasm. I rode on its shoulders and desperately pulled the belt with my right hand while holding the small broken shield in my left. That son of AB*TCH raised its warhammer and swung it at me like it was crazy, again and again. Under Miranda's odd gaze, Big Leather Belt shook Cohen's neck vigorously, making the latter dizzy. Finally, it crumpled down onto the floor when my shield was almost completely shattered. Ah, Cohen recovered from the dizziness and raised his head in astonishment. You didn't let go, did you? For orcs, the more mortally wounded they are, the more strength they have to fight back. Bingo. Bro, It's obvious that you know the ropes. Big Leather Belt slapped his own thigh and exclaimed, we mustn't let go. This is something that I only learned afterwards. At the time, I thought the orc was already out of breath and let go of the belt. It turned out that damned animal sprung up as if it came back to life and grabbed my head hard while making weird, loud sounds. Fortunately, the king was inspecting the north at that time. The White Blade Guards were the ones who came to help. Caslin arrived right in time and chopped open that son of AB** Teach's head from the back with his axe. I was almost fainting at that point. From that day onwards, all of them started calling me, Big Leather Belt. Ha. Cohen sighed as he recalled his experiences in the Western Desert frontlines. So, you've also fought against orcs? Big Leather Belt asked curiously, showing keen interest. Yes, but they were desert orcs instead of glacial orcs. Cohen laughed. We were mercenaries there. We fought against the orcs by bending down and lowering our heads, and then attacking from the back or from below. Ah, this is the method of the citizens of the Empire from the south, going around in circles with the orcs, Big Leather Belt contemplatively said. This cannot be done in Northland since our movements are stiffer than usual in the cold and we would not be agile enough. So, in Northland, the best method would be to launch a sudden head-on attack. To fight promptly and annihilate them with one blow. Cohen nodded in praise. It is different in the desert. The orcs have a high tolerance to heat and are not afraid of the high temperatures of metal armor. They have equipment ranging from plate armor to chain armor. I had even seen orcs who had their groins equipped. That's when we had to put our agility to use and look for opportunities to strike their vital organs. As they chatted warmly about each other's battle experiences, Big Leather Belt finally brought them into the house. Oh, look at you, what a typical Northland maiden. Tall and voluptuous, you even have a beautiful face. Leading them into the house, Big Leather Belt's eyes brightened when he saw Miranda. Since Caslin recommended that you come here, do you want to consider staying? We have quite a few good men here who are single. There are even toughened men who were part of the White Blade Guards. Miranda's expression changed immediately. She looked awkwardly at Cohen. Cohen spread his hands to show that he did not know what to do, either. However, Big Leather Belt immediately frowned. He shook his head and said, forget it, they're not good enough for you. They're wretches and brutes who are unwilling to be manual laborers in their homeland and want quick cash instead. They probably can't take care of their families well, either. What right do they have to have such a good wife like you? Big Leather Belt sighed. They'll be biting off more than they can chew. They can't even feed themselves. Serves them right to be celebrating Singles Day. Miranda listened to Big Leather Belt's words mutely. You are a tall, well-built and strong Northland maiden. Based on the standards of those upperclassmen, you must be very popular in your homeland. You also have fair skin. Big Leather Belt sat down while he chattered on with light pants. I have 3 younger sisters, so I know that maidens your age are impulsive, passionate, and often not interested in young men near home. All of you desire to leave home to seek the opportunity to meet a warrior who is the bravest, the most heroic, and has the highest battle achievements. You might even have the opportunity to marry one. But trust me, even though the world outside looks splendid, it's often a lot more complicated and harder to understand compared to your homeland. The men outside clad in armor might look handsome, but they'll never be as pure and as loyal as the silly lads at home. Listen to my advice. You should go home and knit the stoutest gown, forge the toughest dagger, and weave the prettiest flower crown. After that, use those things to choose the sincerest lad out of those who follow you around. But don't be too eager to please him. Keep him dangling, and then wait for him to be drafted for military service to train himself on the battlefield. This is how men become someone who is worthy of respect. Then, if his feelings towards you are still the same, put that flower crown over his head and bring him to meet your parents. Don't bother about his wealth. Don't bother about his family background. It's more important that he is responsible, sincerely loves you, cares about you and knows how to dote on you. It would be the best if he is also a little afraid of you. Nowadays, neither extensive wealth nor a noble status can compensate for the lack of sincerity. Cohen pressed his stomach hard and held back his laughter as he watched Miranda's darkening expression. I tell my daughter all the time that she will have to marry into a decent family when she grows up. However, it must be to somebody who truly loves her. I also look forward to handing her over to a good lad one day. Big Leather Belt was spluttering when he suddenly furrowed his brows. Cohen watched in surprise as Big Leather Belt's expression became extremely unpleasant. The latter stood up abruptly and dashed out of the house. Both of you, I thought you went to town to see the prince. Turns out you're hiding here. The next moment, before the 2 people in the house could react, a maiden and a young lad outside cried out in fear. Daddy, stop it, Kevin is only here to give me something. Mister, let's talk this out, After that came Big Leather Belt's deafening roar. Give something. Did you think that I don't know what you're thinking about, stinky brat? FCK off, FCK off, stay away from my daughter Cecilia. My daughter is not at the age of marriage yet. If you dare to come and find Cecilia in secret again, I will break all 3 of your legs. Amid the sounds made by the chickens and dogs next door, Cohen watched Big Leather Belt, whose words did not match his actions, with eyes wide and mouth agape. He then met Miranda's eyes. Both of them burst out laughing at the same time. Smiling, Miranda raised her head and gazed afar at the top of the hill where Heroic Spirit Palace was situated. Her sight soon became blurred. The silly lads at home are pure and loyal. Ellipsis. Thales treaded Heroic Spirit Palace's floor tiles stiffly, one step at a time. Compared to Renaissance Palace's simple, restrained style where the outside and inside were consistent, the interior design of Heroic Spirit Palace was very contradictory. Some sections appeared rough and imposing, like the crude carvings on every portico, stair railings made of huge logs of wood, and animal heads that were specially made into war trophies. However, there were many parts that were meticulously and intricately carved, such as certain exquisitely cut floor tiles, ceiling domes covered in paintings, and luxurious everlasting lamp holders. Traces of the history and time were also varied. The material and luster of the wall tiles in some corners looked as if they have been there for a few hundred years, but it was obvious that other parts were renovated a few years ago. In his opinion, the interior of Heroic Spirit Palace was like layer upon layer of murals. New inscriptions were piled on past impressions, weaving history and the present into one. But Thales was not in the mood to admire all of this. He was trying his best to compose himself while thinking about the political identity of the king cum archduke, which was exclusive to Extit, preparing himself to face the upcoming challenge. Even though Neuven VII had already reached out to him through Nicholas and Shiles, Thales' experiences had made him believe that life is always full of unknowns, and that accidents always happen suddenly. He must be well prepared. Under Merc's signal, the second prince of Constellation walked past the white blade guards who were staring straight ahead, and passed through countless porticos. He then walked slowly towards an ovular ring-shaped stone hall with no corners. The lighting there was not good and it was very dim, but there were 6 braziers in iron stands that burned vigorously. Apart from chasing away the cold, they shakily illuminated the stone hall. Braziers again, just like Lampod, the suzerains of Extit like braziers this much. Thales thought mockingly. He took a deep breath and stepped forwards into the stone hall. Merc did not follow and the doors closed behind the prince. From afar, Thales saw a simple and sturdy table in the middle of the stone hall. It was brownish-black and rectangular in design. A white-haired old man sat facing Thales on the other side of the table. He was around 60 to 70 years old. He wore a thick, red and black robe, and a dark gold crown on his head. The crown's design was quite simple and set into the forehead position was a dark red gemstone. The old man had his hands placed on the table, but his head was lowered and he did not say anything. Because of the distance and the dim lighting, Thales could not see his face clearly. However, Thales could guess his identity. The boy approached that simple yet sturdy table. On both sides of the old man sat 5 men of varying appearances and adornment. 2 were on his left, 3 on his right. The only similarity those 5 men of varying ages shared was that from the moment Thales stepped into the stone hall, they glared at him with unfriendly, almost ferocious gazes, sizing up the 7-year-old boy. 1 king and 5 archdukes. Thales frowned as he got to the front of the long table. The Extitians did not save him a seat. They showed no intention of adding an extra seat for him either. This is bad. He gritted his teeth slightly. Thales was forced to stand on the ice-cold stone floor as he faced 6 of the most powerful and influential suzerains in Extit. He was not even tall enough so he had to raise his head and look upwards at them. This made the atmosphere highly unfavorable for him. It seems that it isn't a thing here to respect elders and love children. It's like I'm back in my child beggar days. Having thought of this, the second prince chuckled internally. It took a lot of his anxiety away. Thales calmed himself down. He had toughened up from the immense dangers he went through ever since that night at Red Street Market. He was confident that he can calm himself in a split second and think of a solution even in perilous situations. And Thales looked at the 5 men, but because they were facing away from the light, their faces were hidden in the dark and could not be seen clearly. Only pairs of eyes could be seen flickering in the glow of the fire, casting immense pressure on the visitor. Also among them was the culprit who co-conspired with Archduke Lampod and Duke Arund in trying to meddle with the succession of the throne, attempting to assassinate the prince twice, having succeeded in their second attempt, and even caused an unprecedented crisis of foreign affairs between the 2 kingdoms. The culprit who nearly brought about war and conflict, as well as disasters and death, the culprit responsible for my current plight is among these 5 people. Thales stared at the 5 indistinct figures in the darkness and clenched his fists in secret. And then there was also the matter of his only possible ally who did not know how to be friendly towards him. Thales raised his head and looked at the old man sitting furthest away, at the other end of the table. That old man was the supreme ruler who had just lost his dearest son. He could not help but notice that the stone hall was decked all over with flags that had the cloud dragon spear symbol on them. Only the area behind the old man was occupied by a large, square fireplace with a shelf made of dark wood mounted on the wall above it. There was a strangely shaped pike made of unknown material on the shelf. It was different from the ancient knight pikes that Thales saw in the books at Mindy's Hall, which had knuckle guards and pike handles. Even though this pike was 2 meters long, it had no knuckle guard and its entire shaft was uniformly thick. The portion near the bottom of the spear, the place where it was supposed to be held, was intentionally sanded. The shaft of the pike was silvery metallic in color, but the part near the spearhead was dark and shiny. The pike was equipped with a ferocious-looking and sharp spearhead which was shaped like a pyramid. Soul Slayer Pike. A deep and slow voice rang in the stone hall. It used to be Reikaru's weapon. It is the Walton family's symbol, and the reason why we are known as the Dragon Spear family. The old man at the other end of the table turned his head back slightly. In the flickering firelight, his face could be seen in the darkness. His face was resolute and steadfast, but covered in wrinkles. Underneath his silvery white hair, his facial features were that of a typical Northlander, with deep-set eyes, a tall nose bridge and a well-contoured profile. However, the curve of his lips held a hint of coldness. It was said that only the Judgment Spear from Constellation could match up to its sharpness and the level of danger it posed to others. It has taken countless lives. It had killed and wounded many highly renowned enemies in the past few hundred years, including the sinister, Morning Archduke, the cruel, human slaughterer, Zyra Darkstorm, the powerful, enemy of the wolves, Kira, the ferocious Nightwing King, and the strange power mystic. Thales frowned slightly. He suddenly recalled Caslin's words about the old man in front of him. When he was younger, he was a good king, the epitome of a sturdy Walton man. When Thales met the old man's eyes, he realized that he had a pair of green eyes and wondered if it was part of the Walton family genetics. Thales himself did not inherit Kessel's sky-blue eyes, anyway. Thales was suddenly dumbstruck. He recalled the head ritual master, Lissa, and Queen Kia's comments about his gray eyes, that they were from his mother. His thoughts returned to the present, but Thales immediately felt a shiver run down his spine. He vaguely noticed at that moment, the old man's green eyes had a strange emotion in it. It was worn, gloomy, bitter, and sorrowful. It was as if he had lived in despair for years. Dangerous and horrifying. In the hundreds and thousands of years after this, the Soul Slayer will continue to live up to its name, said the steely-looking old man slowly. It will definitely slaughter more people. Chapter 128 The Born King 2. The old man's voice slowly rose. Just like this, the Soul Slayer will never rest until we destroy every single one of our enemies or until the Waltons are practically wiped out. But if that time arrives, I swear on the kings of past dynasties that the world will also come to an end. The old man's voice trailed off softly, but Thales could sense that the 5 archdukes by his left and right were shifting around either naturally or unnaturally in the dark. I believe that this is a great weapon, but solely relying on destruction and vengeance is probably not possible to display its glory, Thales said somewhat meaningfully, since it was once held in the hands of such a mighty person. Surely Reikaru's wisdom, valiance, personality and glory are also reasons behind the greatness of the Soul Slayer Pike. According to plan, an expected conflict would happen between Nuven and Thales. The hunter's trap would then be laid out at that time. The old man did not reply. Even though Thales knew that this was all acting, he still twitched the corner of his lips in awkwardness. The atmosphere was very tense. In that instant, Thales could relate to what the suzerains thought of when they stared at Kessel back in Constellation. No one knows. A lonely king who completely lacks apprehension. What exactly would he do? The scene of Koshter, the one-eyed dragon's forceful abdication in the Hall of Stars was still vivid in Thales' mind. Thales suddenly started to feel anxious for no reason. He gulped a little, controlled himself from being nervous, which started to become easier after he gained energy from that fluctuation, and gave his greetings respectfully in his original position. At the same time, he recited the script he had practiced before, enunciating each word clearly. I, Thales Jadastar, the second prince of Constellation, on behalf of my father, the 39th Supreme King of Constellation of the Southern Islands and the Western Deserts, King Kessel Jadastar, am honored to pay a visit to the glorious Extit, as well as the honorable Dragon Cloud City, and visit the equally prestigious and renowned Archduke of Dragon Cloud City, who is also the ruler of Extit, the compelling, common elected king. The Born King, King Nuven Walton. The Born King. This was the nickname given to Nuven VII. It was not used by many, but it was widely known by the people. He gained this nickname because it was frequently said that he had already showed leadership qualities when he was young. Almost like he was born to be king. Thales lifted his torso and looked at the old man's cold, unchanging expression. His brows were tightly furrowed together. After taking in a deep breath, Thales slowly said, "My father and I both deeply understand your loss and sorrow. He entrusted me to represent the Jadastar family in expressing his deepest apology towards you as well as the Walton family, and to express his grievance towards Prince Mariah's misfortune." This was a grudge between the two families, not between the two countries. He had to at least make this clear. It was what Putre had reminded him before. But he believes in your moral conduct and ability. He believes that you will make the best choice in this matter. The Jadastar family is willing to provide every possible help to remedy and bear the tragic consequence. And I am here, Thales said, to bring forward the Jadastar family's most peaceful and friendly message. Now, he had to wait for a reply from the receiving party. What came after was silence. For a moment, Thales could only hear the dull noise of the braziers and the cold wind outside the stone hall. 5 pairs of eyes were fixated motionlessly on him. And the old man, who was the only person with the right to reply him, was also very still and his green eyes were dim as ever. Just when he felt like a century had passed, the common elected king of Exted and the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City, the born king, King Nuven VII finally took slow breath and lifted his head in a manner befitting a king. His face was worn and exhausted when he looked at Thales. I am very old. I am only slightly younger than your grandfather, King 80 of Constellation, but I do not have as many children as him. Nuven sighed and spoke very slowly, making others feel the eerie coldness in his tone. I only had my eldest son when I was 30 years old. And Mariah was the child I had when I was over 40 years old. I still remember, when he was your age, he once leaned against my seat. He begged me to let him go out of the palace and hunt with the help of the White Blade Guards. King Nuven's expression was numb while his eyes revealed his complicated remembrance and sorrow. I always laughed when I assented. But after his older brother passed away, I became very scrupulous. Nuven narrowed his eyes and slowly shook his head. I could not let him sustain even a tiny bit of harm anymore, I could not. But my rationality still told me. King Nuven straightened his body and he moved closer in Thales' direction as he said, children had to grow by being tempered by hardships. There was silence for more than 10 seconds. The breathing of the archdukes from both sides of the room were the only audible sounds. Thales' rationality told him, even if this is just acting, Nuven's current mood is absolutely not fake. I better not open my mouth. If this is all Nuven's plan. Finally, King Nuven exhaled. He closed his eyes and said slowly, the day before I sent him down south, Mariah told me that he had a lover, but her background was not good. So he came to beg for my help, hoping that I would permit and bless their marriage. I was not too happy. King Nuven leaned against the back of his chair in dejection. Do you know what I said to him? As usual, an inauspicious premonition enveloped Thales' heart. He comforted himself. Everything is under King Nuven's control. I said. King Nuven opened his eyes and stared at his opened right palm. Then, in an apathetic and cold manner, he said, we will talk about that after you come back. I said it that way. King Nuven's voice started to tremble without him realizing, and the few archdukes turned towards their king with an unreadable expression. I will wait for you to come back. In the next instant, King Nuven suddenly clenched his right fist and smashed it upon the long table. Thud. Thales was too scared to even breathe as he silently watched a father, who had just lost his son, expressing his sadness in an incomparably genuine manner. He was my only remaining son. The old man's expression became dull and obscure. I should be able to witness his transformation into a real man and warrior. Then, before I die, I should be able to hand over my position, my fortune, my power, my everything to him, to Mariah. Nuven VII's tone seemed to be remorseful and desperate. But now, I can only sit here and listen to a brat's hypocritical apology. King Nuven's tone became increasingly dull, but the atmosphere became increasingly odd. Listen to him saying, I am very sorry that your son died on our territory. And there is nothing I can do about it. Thales' heart sank. Things were still alright earlier on, but the direction in which this situation is heading is quite bad. Is the rough part coming? He secretly reminded himself of this. The old king let out a long sigh. It was evident that his sorrowful mood had made the archdukes somewhat uncomfortable. They were visibly looking at each other and exchanging quick glances. Why? Nuven lifted his head, he furrowed his brows and continued in a deep voice, because I am a king. Because I am almost 70 years old, because I am carrying a family on my shoulders, because I have to maintain the equilibrium of this country. Because once I do anything to this child, I have to pay the price of starting a full-blown war where I will have to fight to my last breath. Thales' expression changed and he said with a soft voice, Your Majesty, I sincerely bring forward Constellation and Jadastars. Sincerely. However, Nuven did not give Thales a chance to speak. Instead, he interrupted him with a cold, apathetic tone. Believe me, when you are my age and your only son gets slaughtered out in the wild like livestock, you will discover that there is nothing more genuine than that hatred and rage. One after another, the archdukes awkwardly adjusted their sitting postures, but not a single one of them voiced up. Especially when facing all of this, as a king, I cannot even do anything. Thales quickly adjusted his own breathing and thought about how to respond. How will King Nuven utilize this situation to set the trap and lure out that secret co-conspirator? Nicholas and Shiles did not say much about that. He turned his gaze towards the 5 archdukes who hid their faces in the dark. Who is it? Do you know that your father is very smart to let you come forward and apologize? He is using this method to protect you and at the same time, eliminate the threat of war. King Nuven raised his left hand in the air and clenched it tightly into a fist. His voice was still trembling, but it was already beginning to sound calmer. Nonetheless, he is humiliating me, humiliating a father's dignity, mocking my powerlessness. Sending the son he had just found to another father who had just lost his son. Is that an apology? The king's expression was cold but indifferent and Thales was feeling increasingly scared. This is not right. This is obviously acting. Yes, Thales took in the atmosphere around him and tried hard to steady his own breathing. He repeated to himself again and again, everything is just as Nicholas and Shiles had said. King Nuven will be very tough on me. Even somewhat cruel. What I have to do is only... Clang. Right at this moment, a clear metallic noise caught Thales' attention. Your Majesty. An archduke who was nearest to the king cried out in surprise. With a cold expression, King Nuven had apparently pulled out a saber from the archduke's waist. Thales took a deep, cold breath. This is not just acting. Seriously, is it necessary to go to this extent, to make use of a weapon? King Nuven stretched his arm. Thud. A longsword with a cross guard was thrown from afar. It landed on the ground right before Thales and gave out a loud clank. The latter could not help but take a step back. At that point, the dark figures of the almost unconcerned archdukes entered Thales' vision. Thales could only passively wait for King Nuven's next move. Meanwhile, he forced himself to start thinking about the archdukes before him. What are they thinking? The Prince of Constellation is facing such circumstances right now. Can they be that unresponsive? Will they see through the show? After all, even though Nicholas was already previously displaying. Wait. Something is wrong. Thales clenched his teeth and he stared in disbelief at the suzerain's longsword beside his feet. The sword had precious rubies embedded in it. Something has to be wrong. Right at this moment, an extremely important question that he had never thought of from the beginning suddenly flashed through Thales' mind. Nicholas and Shiles, these two people who told me about King Nuven's wish to collaborate. One of them is the head of the White Blade Guards while the other is King Nuven's firm partner in trade. But are they, purely of service for King Nuven? If I think about it from a more terrifying perspective, are they really even on Nuven VII's side? Thales' heart turned cold. If they aren't, then, Nuven's so-called proposal, previously. The so-called trap, so-called hunting. When he thought of that, Thales' clenched left fist trembled uncontrollably. But that's unlikely, right? You have come forward to apologize. Under the watchful gazes of all the archdukes, Nuven VII calmly lifted his head. You are indeed brave. Now let us see how brave you really are. King Nuven stared at him without any emotions on his face. A sincere apology should not just stop at words, of course. Thales suddenly narrowed his eyes. Marquis Shiles' words rang in his ears once again. King Nuven's treatment towards you may be a little cruel. A little cruel. The next second, the following words undoubtedly came from Nuven VII. Pick up this sword. Amid the archduke's different reactions, King Nuven's face was visibly cold as he enunciated each word clearly. Slit your own throat. In that instant, Thales stared at Nuven's gaze, which was filled with hatred and anger. His mind just went blank. Chapter 129 A Duel. Dragon Cloud City, West Express Avenue. I'm here. A young fellow dashed into a butcher's shop. He leaned against the wall, panting heavily. The Prince of Constellation is in town, so I went. Went to look for your woman again. The butcher snapped, exposing his lie. That's why you're late again. Hey, what are you saying? I was just sending her some gifts. The young fellow's face turned red. And Cecilia is not my woe, not yet. You're a halfwit, Kevin. Seemingly speaking from experience, the butcher gave Kevin a look of condescension. Sending her bits of this and that once in a while is not enough. You have to declare your love. Declare love. Do you know that? Hearing this, Kevin started scratching his head, feeling frustrated. Don't you know she has a scary dad with a weird nickname, Big Leather Belt or whatever? I heard he was in the Glacial Sentries. He'll never allow his daughter to marry a dirt poor errand boy from the plebeians' union. The butcher hacked a pig shin in half. Kevin clapped as he pulled a long face. Yeah, that's why. Then, act like a man. Go meet him in person, talk to her father face to face. The butcher grimaced, slamming his cleaver into the chopping block. Kevin was shaken. He opened his mouth and started stammering. But eventually, with a look of defeat, he swallowed the words he intended to say. I'm scared. HMPH, wimp, the butcher grumbled, feeling disappointed. Forget it then. Anyway, how's your errand? Here it is. Brooding, Kevin handed him a crumpled note. Chief Gleeward's reply, allegedly. The butcher took the note and watched the young fellow leave, still sulking. What a carefree life you have. A joyful voice sounded at the back of the room, butchering, doing business and giving relationship advice to some silly boy. The butcher's expression stiffened a little. He turned around and swung the door shut. Paying me a visit at a time like this. Gu, the butcher from the Far East turned away from the door. Aren't you worried that Black Sword may be back? He said to a figure in the dark corner behind him. The fake intel was your idea after all. A young man in white, Raphael Lindbergh, stepped out of the darkness with a faint smirk on his face. Like a wolf on the step, Gu grew wary in an instant. His eyes were downcast. He just waltzed in here, brimming with confidence. Looks like he really knows how to cover his tracks, one that will even keep him hidden from Black Sword's frighteningly godlike senses, and that guy can detect and track down the slightest of movements, even those of insects and small animals from hundreds of meters away. Gu narrowed his eyes. Raphael did not respond to his statement earlier, instead he said the following with a hint of mockery in his voice, "What, were you a relationship consultant before you double-crossed the Raven Guard? Must have accumulated lots of experience, Raven Guard, these two words hit Gu. Despite years of training and practice to retain total control over his emotions as well as restrain his physical response, Gu could not help but have his heart freeze slightly, and his blood pump faster. He looked up at Raphael and their eyes met. Their gazes were as calm as a lake, although they were both aware of the underlying enmity beneath their exchange. Never show your hand, rather, ceaselessly seek to uncover the enemy's breaking points by using diversions and misdirection, by utilizing your chances and opportunities as well as stirring the eye of the storm. These are the tactics passed down from the secret forces and employed by the kingdom's secret intelligence. Since the union of Maenad Nox and Constellation, both we and the secret intelligence have been grappling with one another behind closed doors. Each party knows its opponent's tricks and modus operandi. However, the question is, where do we start? As his master's words rang in his ear, Gu became increasingly alert. It's interesting, watching these folks go about their lives. Gu glanced over his empty storefront lazily, cleaning up the table in an unhurried manner. Most people were off to see the Prince of Constellation, joining in all the hubbub. You know, he said meaningfully, after almost a lifetime of living in despair and darkness, one does desire to see the light of hope. I thought someone with your past would be accustomed to interesting things. The corner of Raphael's lips curled upwards. Accustomed. Kevin is the true embodiment of slum life, said Gu as he gave a cheerless chuckle and a look of intrigue. Wealth, background, status, he has none of those. The only thing he owns is love, his beloved. He's always pictured her as the most beautiful, most precious presence in the world. He thinks of her with a smile, with bliss, with hope. But most importantly, he is given the right to seek happiness and a life goal despite the challenges. Gu directed his stare at the slightly bemused Raphael. That boy is living a life. Rays of sunlight shone into the shopfront and on Gu. His eyes were calm and his voice was flat. Compared to both of us who live like maggots in the shadows of secrecy, he is unbroken and complete. Don't you find it interesting? Still veiled in the dark, Raphael listened patiently to him. But once a person succumbs to joy, he has given into weakness, he said as his smile persisted, just like the things that made you vulnerable. Think about it, King Yao. I don't need to be strong, Gu snapped in a monotonous voice. I just need to settle this deal with you people, he said firmly. Unlike your seniors, who each thrive with his impeccable skills or her resourcefulness, you are a dagger in the eternal darkness, forever hidden. Your power will only be witnessed when you strike, therefore you must avoid unnecessary conflicts at all cost. Instead, you prepare yourself for your most impactful, deadliest, final blow. Recalling his master's words, Gu's expression dimmed. A dagger in the dark. Forever hidden. Waiting to strike. Too bad. Gu inhaled deeply as his face became expressionless. Raphael had been watching him like a hawk the entire time. He laughed softly. Rest assured that our intel is always accurate, Raphael said, feeling amused. An attempted assassination on His Highness' life at the fortress is their most often used tactic. You'll certainly find what you're looking for. Gu remained silent as he nodded. Raphael's smile broadened and he lowered his head. The prince and his escorts have entered the city. They are in Heroic Spirit Palace as we speak. He then moved on to his intended topic. What have you got? Gu held his stare and unfolded the note delivered by Kevin. At the same time, he glanced over the text. According to the local union, the monster's location is confirmed. Gu put down the note. Although we're not sure what you're planning to do, he muttered. Raphael chuckled and nodded. Oh, don't you worry, he said in a peculiar manner, we fight for justice, don't we? Purging our cities of the calamity, devoting ourselves to the safety of the human race. With a snort, Gu turned and shuffled away. Bullocks. Unaffected, Raphael shook his head and chuckled. He averted his gaze to the window, and what lay beyond, Heroic Spirit Palace on the mountain. He was momentarily lost in reverie. He could not help but recall what Gu said about Kevin the Pauper. The only thing he owns is love, his beloved. He's always pictured her as the most beautiful, most precious presence in the world. He thinks of her with a smile, with bliss, with hope. His eyes dimmed as he slowly shut his eyes. Thales stared at the longsword on the floor in cold sweat. What's the deal with this situation? Slit my own throat. The faces of Nicholas and Shiles flashed across his mind. However, right now, they appeared to be infuriatingly sardonic in his eyes. For the sake of your highness and King Nuven's best interest, His Majesty implores you to cooperate with him in the execution of his plot of vengeance. The hunter has sharpened his knife. Traps and snares are in position. The fate of your prey is sealed. The prince lifted his head and looked at the old man, his supposed ally, in disbelief. King Nuven's steely stare was pinned against him. Who is really the prey and who is really the hunter? He vividly remembered explaining his alliance with King Nuven to Count Gilbert back in Mindy's hall. Now it just seems like a joke. Go on, Nuven the Seventh urged with a soulless voice, show us your valor and pride as the descendant of the Jadastar family. An eye for an eye. Thales' eyes were fixed on the sword, his breathing accelerated as his head spun. He took a glance at King Nuven again, but the coldness and hatred in the old man's stare persisted. What should I do? There's no time for doubt and reasoning. Facing such a predicament, Thales' eyebrows wriggled uncontrollably. What should I do? King Nuven wanted his life. Thales squeezed his eyes shut, clenching his fists. What should I do? What now? A peculiar-sounding voice emerged among the 5 archdukes. As a Jadastar and successor of the Oath Keeper, do you not have the guts to sacrifice yourself as an act of atonement? Why are you even here? For a tour. The person who spoke leaned forward and Thales finally saw the first archduke. Sitting on the left of Nuven the Seventh was a bearded man. He was a brawny and boorish-looking man in his 40s. He was also crudely dressed, and atop his attire, he wore a triangular-shaped brooch with a circle on it. The man was just glaring at Thales with absolute disdain and uncontainable hostility. If you don't have the balls to do it, then, kneel before us and beg. Little constellatiate bastard, the bearded man spat. Thales' clenched teeth tightened even more. Damn it. Darn Northlanders. In the meantime, another archduke leaned over. The firelight illuminated his face and his bowl haircut. He was a huge man, also in his 40s, but appeared slightly younger than the bearded man. He had rather angular facial features and a pointy chin. There were glowing images of swords and blades sewn onto his garments. Perhaps those lofty constellatiates thought that, the man with the bowl cut coldly added, sending a noble-born, 7-year-old brat to our rural land would be the biggest honor and privilege bestowed upon us, barbaric Northland men. Perhaps that Kessel was thinking, wasn't it just a prince that we killed? The man with the bowl cut gave a chilling grin, purposefully adding fuel to the fire. But see, my son is here to deal with you, goosey Northlanders. The tension heightened. Thales' breathing continued to hasten as he whipped his head up. His stares, which were directed at the archdukes, became increasingly searing and intimidating. Oh, are you mad? The third archduke leaned towards the firelight. He was an aging suzerain, about 50 to 60 years old, bitter-faced and bald. What was left of his hair was a clump beside each ear. He wore a copper circlet around his forehead, and a robe embroidered with a chunk of chain. Say, are you going to man up and pick up that sword or not? Said the bald suzerain sharply. Whatever you want to do with it, disembowel yourself or come at us. Either one is much more effective than just glaring at us, am I right? Thales took a deep breath as his eyes swept over the bearded man, the man with the bowl cut and the bald suzerain. Meanwhile, Nuven the Seventh remained unmoved. The 6 men seated in the stone hall were now glowering at the boy and the sword on the ground before him. Bearing through their stares, Thales felt a burst of anger in his chest. Is this what they had planned all along? Betrayed, his bewilderment gradually turned into fury and resentment. What should I do? I need a plan. A blood debt. Vengeance. Kings. The archdukes. A rough idea suddenly flickered at the back of Thales' mind. And he looked up abruptly. Very well, Thales' pants grew harsher. There was a refusal to give in, displeasure and also indignation in his words. Blood for blood, that is rather fair. Under all their gazes, which were either filled with rumination, derision or aloofness, Thales slowly bent down. He picked up the sword from the ground. Once again, I'm faced with such a situation. And once again, I'm faced with such a choice. I'm really getting fed up. This bunch of bastards. His gaze gradually gained a determined edge. Despite all of this, I will not die here. I will not. With a burst of strength in his arms, Thales lifted the sword. Hold on, this sword. He was shocked. Why is it so heavy? The sword slipped off Thales' hands the moment his attention slipped a little, because he was unprepared. Clang. The longsword fell heavily on the floor, and the echoes from the crash lingered in the air endlessly. When they saw this, the 5 archdukes burst into laughter. It was as though they were watching a monkey performing in the streets. Relax, boy, the bald suzerain said with a profound tone, take a good look. This is the weight of the swords in Northland. Thales closed his eyes and took 2 heavy breaths. It's so heavy. Compared to the heavy wooden sword I used to practice with giants when I was in Mindy's hall, this suzerain's sword is slightly heavier. Ignoring the archduke's mocking glances, Thales took a deep breath and grabbed the sword's hilt once more with a determined expression. This time, he used both hands, and only then did the sword not fall from his hands. Thales lifted the longsword with great effort. Skreek. The tip of the blade created an unpleasant, loud noise as it was dragged across the tiles on the floor. Come on, work a little harder, the man with the bowl cut sneered at Thales. You'll soon be able to lift it up to your neck. The mocking laughter from the archdukes grew even louder. King Nuven's expression was as cold and aloof as ever. It was as if he was waiting for Thales. The second prince gritted his teeth, and with both his hands, he dragged the sword with great effort. Finally, with much difficulty, he brought the longsword in front of him. He panted harshly while he held the heavy sword in his hand, raising his head to look at the 5 suzerains. "Remember this well, boy. Never use the forces you have behind you to threaten a Northlander," the bearded man spat fiercely. "We have nothing to fear. This is the way of Northland. We are not afraid of that cowardly father of yours or that weak country of yours that's behind you." Thales gripped the sword and his brows were tightly furrowed. He was gradually increasing the strength in his hand. Although there was clearly nothing for him to fuss over, the man with the bowl cut, who had been mocking him the whole time, said in an alarmed manner, "Do not worry, your highness. We will definitely stop you before you cut your own throat. This is Extit, a small, backwater country. How would we have the audacity to let the descendant of the mighty empire and future leader of Constellation bleed here? Ha 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 ha, we are. You are so annoying." Thales cut him off coldly. "Bowl cut." The Archduke by his side could not help but let a chuckle escape from his mouth. The man's words died in his throat as he shut his mouth and glared at Thales. "Did you not want my life to compensate for Prince Mariah's?" the Prince of Constellation asked faintly. "This is too easy a matter to solve." "Then what are you waiting for?" the bald suzerain said in a low tone, "Waiting for us to stop you? You want me to die in this manner?" Thales endured the strange gazes from the entire crowd and spat. "That is too foolish and too weak. Besides, there is absolutely no honor in it to speak of. I've heard that the ancient knights would swear fealty to their kings, and from then on they would obey their beliefs, protect their glory as well as defend their honor." Thales raised his head and looked at the weird, bald Archduke and the one with the bowl cut. "Even their deaths were honorable. And I've also heard that Extit inherited the ancient knights' glorious tradition. I believe that you value glory and honor more than your own lives and safety. You've said so many things. Are you afraid of death?" The bearded man snorted derisively. "Now what, do you want us to spare you to protect this so-called honor that you speak of?" "No," Thales sighed. "Once I came to this place, I did not expect myself to return alive." Without waiting for the archdukes to mull over the logic in his words, Thales gritted his teeth and stood straight. There was a peculiar look in Thales' eyes. He stared across the end of the long table, meeting King Nuven's gaze squarely without backing down even the slightest. While staring at Thales, Nuven VII's gaze changed slightly. A different light shone within his green eyes. "Instead of ending my own life without any honor and pride, I would like to ask Extit, who adheres to the tradition of seeking glory, to give me the most dignified death." The Prince of Constellation enunciated his words clearly and slowly. "Common elected King of Extit, King Nuven Walton VII." The next moment, the second Prince of Constellation, Thales Jadistar, made the heavy sword stand straight on the ground, supporting it with one hand. Then, he lifted his right hand resolutely and decisively formed a straight line in front of him, so that he could point at the old king in the distance. He spoke without mincing his words, "Please, come and take my life with your own hands." "What?" The 5 archdukes were all equally stunned. Thales shouted with all his strength, "I would rather die in the hands of another individual like a warrior. I would rather stand face to face with you and watch you drive your sword into my heart." His voice echoed throughout the stone hall. Then, the hall instantly fell into silence. In the terrifying silence, Thales stood up against the 6 people before him. The bald man narrowed his eyes and looked at Thales like he was about to dig a hole in Thales' body with his eyes. The bearded man had a sullen expression on his face, his gaze traveling back and forth between King Nuven and Thales. The man with the bowl cut rubbed his hands together. His thoughts were unknown. "If killing a child personally makes you uneasy, I don't mind changing my words." As he observed the Archduke's expressions, Thales snickered and panted. "I've heard of an ancient right of inheritance in Northland. It's practiced anywhere from inheriting a title of nobility to archdukes choosing their king." 2 seconds later, the echoes of Thales' words gradually disappeared from the stone hall. An ancient right. Inheriting a title of nobility. The archdukes choosing their king. The 5 archdukes frowned in succession. But their gazes on Thales had already changed. Their faces flitted between surprise and bewilderment. As for Nuven VII, his expression was the same. He still looked as aloof and apathetic as ever, like he was still not over the pain of losing his son. Thales pulled back his right hand and pressed it against the sword's hilt. His eyes were still fixed on King Nuven. "King Nuven, if you truly want revenge," he said flatly, "let us duel to solve this problem. You and me." The silence lasted for several seconds. After those brief seconds, the suzerain with the bowl cut became the first to laugh. The other archdukes also followed suit and roared with laughter. Only King Nuven remained unchanged. The man with the bowl cut pointed at Thales, and the wrinkles on his face were visible as he laughed. "Did you hear? A 7-year-old brat, ha ha ha, says he wants to duel." However, his laughter did not last long. Nuven Walton, the common elected king of Extit, slowly raised his hand and put a stop to the archduke's sneers. The man with the bowl cut froze for a moment. In his old but deep voice, the old king spoke with a drawl. Oh, you want to duel me? He met Thales' gaze in the air, causing the latter's heart to freeze in fear for a moment. On what basis? The Prince of Constellation took a deep breath. Come on. Thales dragged the heavy sword and took a step forward as he replied King Nuvan in a loud voice, on the basis of hate and justice. His young voice echoed throughout the stone hall. The two archdukes still hidden in the shadows started whispering into each other's ears. The other three stared at Thales with hostile expressions. Did Constellation not kill your one and only remaining son? Thales gritted his teeth and stopped his legs from trembling. Is it not the most reasonable and just thing for a father like you to do in order to take revenge personally? The bearded archduke let out a displeased harumph. Looking livid, he said, a 7-year-old brat like you wants to challenge the common elected king of Extit. Are you not bothered by the fact that the difference is too great? King Nuvan gently lowered his arm and clasped his hands together, watching Thales quietly. For some reason, Thales felt a large amount of his hostility disappear in that instant. Was that just a figment of my imagination? Regardless, I still need to do what I need to do. No. Thales Jadastar raised his head and began to imagine the posture that Morris from the Brotherhood carried while he inspected the streets. Thales then tried to project his own air of haughtiness. I am the future king of Constellation. He is the current king of Extit. Our status is equal. Tormund and Midir's blood flow in my veins, while King Nuvan inherited the blood of Rikaru and Chara. Our backgrounds are equal. King Nuvan's lips suddenly curled into a faint, cold sneer. And, Thales returned the archduke's different gazes without backing down, I am 7 years old. I am young and my body is weak. My hands are small and my legs are short. With anger in his voice, Thales spat out his words through gritted teeth. And you, King Nuvan. You are nearly 70, you are old, your strength is failing you, and your vision is weak. Thales took a deep breath and put on a scornful smile. We are well matched in strength, and the chances of us winning against the other is close. I believe this will be a dangerous duel and an exciting one, not much different from a king selection congress. What do you say? The born king of Extit. Once he said these words, some of the archdukes frowned while some of them clicked their tongues. They all had different expressions on their faces. King Nuvan's gaze became even stranger, and his smile gradually disappeared. In that moment, a bark of laughter shattered the odd atmosphere. Ha 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 ha, the fourth archduke laughed out loud, then turned around to reveal himself under the light. You actually had the guts to say that, brat, old and weak, matched in terms of power. Ha ha, your majesty, this is too interesting. Thales was momentarily stunned before he looked at the archduke. This archduke had long hair spilling over his shoulders, he was in his 40s, and the emblem on his body was that of a scroll. He had a resolute face as well as a bold laughter, and he constantly reminded Thales of that Northern Territory duke in Constellation, who was also a Northlander. As he laughed boisterously, he ignored the reactions of the others and even punched the table. You have guts, brat. The final archduke possessed a gentle, pleasant voice. His voice soon traveled forth towards Thales. All right, perhaps we should talk about this further, there is no need for us to be at each other's throats. The firelight shone on the owner of the voice. Your Majesty, the last archduke to speak was the youngest. He was perhaps only in his 30s and he was a young brunette with a clean face. A horseshoe with blood was sewn on his shoulder. He continued to speak in his gentle voice, I would suggest that you continue weighing the situation. Concret Pafret, King Nuvan's expression did not change. He only turned his head slightly and directed his gaze to the young archduke. Do I look like I am joking? The young brunette, Archduke Concret Pafret instantly found his words dying in his mouth. The remaining 4 archdukes exchanged glances and adjusted their posture. They were slightly surprised by this sudden turn of events and they were waiting for their king's decision. Nuvan VII directed his gaze back to Thales while he remained sitting on his throne. He stared at him for a full 6 seconds. And Thales' legs finally stopped trembling. During that moment, Old Caslin's final appraisal on Nuvan VII crossed his mind. Nuvan is also human, he can grow old, and can also be confused by slanderous talk and sex. There will also be a day when he becomes influenced by desire and impulse. Thales chuckled lightly in his heart. Of course, King Nuvan, Thales said softly, drawing their attention once more. I respect you since your age is close to that of my grandfather's. It does seem rather unfitting in terms of protocol to ask you to fight against me. Expressions of puzzlement appeared on the archduke's faces almost simultaneously. So after all of that, you were just full of bravado. The bearded man said in derision. That is why you still do not dare to. No, Thales cut him off. The duel will still continue. But if we are really going to end everything like that today, Thales swept his gaze past the 5 archdukes, the bearded man, the man with the bowl cut, the bald man, the man with the long hair and the young brunette. He then spoke in a tone that allowed no room for doubt, I believe that all of the 5 archdukes here are loyal people. One of you will definitely fight for his majesty. Once he said these words, the man with the long hair was the first to clench his fists. The other archdukes instantly stopped breathing. What do you say, your excellencies? Would you fight for your king? Thales gritted his teeth, raising his voice. I wonder which one of you is willing to duel with me for the honor. The honor of piercing my heart with the blade of vengeance. Kill the Prince of Constellation, avenge Extit. Thales panted heavily as he spoke. He looked up again after a moment. The 5 archdukes blanched at his words, much to his delight. Chapter 130 The King and His Archdukes. The place you're heading to is not too far from here, but, lately things have not been very peaceful in Dragon Cloud City, said Big Leather Belt with pursed lips. He shook his head as he spoke to Cohen and Miranda. You all know that Prince Mariah went missing for a month, then all of a sudden there was news of his death from Constellation. Rumors flew everywhere and the men were eager to be enlisted, ready to venture south to fight the Empire. Next thing we know, there's no more war. And then today, just now in fact, the Prince of Constellation arrived to make things right. We also heard that the King of Constellation swore if his son was harmed, there would be no peace between the two kingdoms until one fell. Cohen and Miranda exchanged glances. The former's eyes were filled with worry, while the latter fell into deep thought. But, hey, is this some kind of joke? Shouldn't they be apologetic? He's here to apologize after all. Did he think Northlanders were people that could easily be threatened? If I was His Majesty, I would cut the bullshit and hang that prince. Then, I would call for every soldier in the country and storm into Eternal Star City. We'll see what the Empire has to say about that. Big Leather Belt grumbled, pounding the table. There's just one problem though, Cohen minced his words. The prince is only 7 years old, turning 8 after the new year. 7. Big Leather Belt scratched his head, appearing to be ill-informed. Okay then. Anyway, the chiefs have already ordered their men to be on alert for the next few days. Those with connections have heard some rumors saying that King Nuvan is livid, and that young prince is going to be, you know. Miranda scowled. Who is spreading this unfounded information? Is this some sort of scheme against His Highness? Or, is it to drive a wedge between King Nuvan and the prince? And let's not forget that His Majesty just lost his only heir. God knows how he must feel. Big Leather Belt sighed, putting aside the next Archduke of Dragon Cloud City and the selection of the next king. Who knows what would happen if His Majesty unleashes his fury, Haya. Wait, you just said, the chiefs. Do you mean chiefs of the local syndicates? Cohen asked. Caslin told me that he has connections with all the powerful people in this city. Yeah, Caslin has made quite a big name for himself. He had some nerve, clashing with His Majesty in front of all the ministers and courtiers. He got kicked out of the White Blade Guards for that. Big Leather Belt cackled. Still, lots of people, from the administrators in Heroic Spirit Palace to the local gang leaders in the city, hold Caslin in high regard. After all those former subordinates of his, who are now flourishing or in retirement, used to receive help and guidance from him. Which is why he directed you to me, he continued, nodding at the two. I am frequently in contact with the local gangs, so he knew I could help. Before we head out, please tell us about them, Cohen said with a solemn expression. It's important that we know. Big Leather Belt looked at Miranda and the latter nodded at him. All right, he flung his arms open, let's do it district by district, starting from where we are now. Shield District and Hammer District are resided by the natives of Dragon Cloud City. These districts are absolute slums. But they are the turfs of Gleeward and his men. You wouldn't want to piss them off. Gleeward, so he's a gang leader. And, he's governing these 2 districts? Asked Officer Cohen, following protocol. The government officials and guards have no jurisdiction over them. No, it's not like that. I mean, he is not the suzerain and he is not working for the government. So, he doesn't have the authority to govern the place. Plus, Gleeward would not purposely challenge the power of nobility or the government, Big Leather Belt explained, waving his hand. However, Gleeward used to be a decorated soldier before he retired, and that has contributed to his current standing in the community. Things happen as you would expect. Cheating outlanders, neighborhood scuffles, which aristocrat has his eye on someone's daughter or starving households during winter. In any case, his men will handle all these things. He always has the people's back. That's why folks in those districts are willing to place their trust in him. Even the disciplinary officers have publicly acknowledged Gleeward's contribution to the 2 poorest neighborhoods and recognized his authority, although I believe that it is because Gleeward was previously in the army as a heavy swordsman. Lots of his former peers are higher-ups now. Some even work in the inner city and Heroic Spirit Palace. Gleeward doesn't have a gang in the physical sense, or regular followers, but if he shows up in the middle of the street one morning and says, "Give me a hand," I assure you, there'll be at least several dozen men putting aside their own work to help. After an hour, another group of people would rush over from outside the city and by afternoon, he would have a huge party. Mind you, half of these volunteers have served in the military. They are strong as well as tough, and they are willing to do anything. Miranda frowned while Officer Cohen nodded, processing the information on the organization of local forces. It was completely different from that in Eternal Star City. As for Sword District, Bow District and Armor District, these are commercial areas. They are highly populated and comparably affluent. Things get a little complicated there. The merchants in the market of Sword District, for example, are folks from outside the city or faraway places. Even those from Constellation do business there. The man in charge there is Vlad. He has a disciplinary officer, and is responsible for the markets in the city. He has his own pack for underground operations, but it has far fewer men and it's not as strong compared to Gleeward's. Big Leather Belt shook his head again. Rumor has it that he is affiliated with Black Street Brotherhood in Constellation, operating in a legal gray area. He apparently earns from taking bribes in the smuggling business between the two kingdoms. He rarely intervenes in things, but folks are mostly scared of him. Black Street Brotherhood, the name sparked Cohen's interest. They've extended their business to Extit. Yeah, this name was unheard of a few years back. At that time, Blood Bottle Gang was the one you looked for to get any Southerner-related matter settled. Big Leather Belt gave a weary shrug. But one day, the Brotherhood surfaced out of nowhere. They marched into the city and had a talk with Vlad as well as Gleeward. We thought these outsiders were Southern geezers, folks from the Empire, who were coming to take away our territories or look for a fight. But none of the chiefs said anything in the end. The Brotherhood did not set up shop down here either. The only thing that changed was they later became one of the supply chains to the local businesses. If you ask me, it's true that their business grew quickly and extensively, but it's not entirely secure. Neither Vlad nor Gleeward trust them. This time for instance, when rumors of the war spread, Vlad immediately cut off their smuggling operations. Now the Brotherhood and merchants they worked with are all gone. Cohen narrowed his eyes. If they expanded at such a rapid speed, perhaps developing the business was not their intention. Maybe it was never their purpose to trade or fight for territories. No way, Big Leather Belt grinned, unconvinced. What kind of gang would they be if they're not interested in territory, profit and business? Now, back to the topic. The Dragon Wings Plaza in Sword District is where caravan merchants from Camus and some quick-witted Northlanders occasionally gather. These people often engage with all sorts of customers, from aristocrats to fugitives. Their goods also suit the locals, fancy, so this place is naturally a local hotspot, spawning lots and lots of stores for certain services, you know. Big Leather Belt gave a suggestive, knowing grin as he grabbed the air with both hands. Squeezy and spongy, soggy and oozy. Cohen laughed at the lewd statement cooperatively, while Miranda huffed in disdain. So what I'm saying is, there's a chamber of commerce formed by Camus merchants and locals based in Dragon Wings Plaza. The Bow District, particularly West Express Avenue, is a different case. To put it simply, Bow District is a blend of other districts, jam-packed with small workshops and stores. The same could be said of Armor District. These two places are constantly in shambles. It's hard to tell whether there's a presence of a local syndicate. If things do go wrong, people there usually turn to a Far Easterner for help. A Far Easterner? Cohen and Miranda shot Big Leather Belt a curious gaze. Yeah, a Far Easterner. He's a butcher named Gu. He has settled down here for more than 10 years. Big Leather Belt shrugged. He doesn't seem to have much influence, but connections are what he has. He has been in contact with Camus merchants, Northlanders, and even Constellations. He's the first to know should anything unusual occur. Therefore, he is also a middleman, who sells intel for a living. As for Arrow District, Spear District, and Axe District, these areas are quite a distance away from the rest. Their residents are powerful and influential, often accompanied by guards during their daily commutes. Commoners like us, affiliated with gangs or not, would have to enter these districts with caution. The location Caslin mentioned, your destination, it's the butcher shop run by the Far Easterner in Armor District, said Big Leather Belt. Some acquaintances of mine told me that there have been a number of new visitors lately. I figure that they may be the people you're looking for. That's where Croce was ambushed during her investigation. Miranda touched the sword by her waist. Is there anything suspicious around that location? Cohen asked anxiously. Fights, for instance, between groups of swordsmen in the middle of the night. Perhaps, even involving swordsmen of eradication. Fight, swordsmen, eradication, Big Leather Belt mumbled. Never heard of it. It isn't our territory after all. Our intel on that is insufficient. He sighed. I suggest you ask for Gu's help. It was his turf. Nothing there escapes his eyes and ears, but of course, you'll have to pay him for the info. All right, Miranda nodded solemnly. We're leaving now. Miranda and Cohen walked out of the house with Big Leather Belt's blessing. The structure of the local forces in Dragon Cloud City is messy. It is unlike the division between the two major underground syndicates in Eternal Star City, and the aggressiveness of the Brotherhood as well as Blood Bottle. But these are the sole sources of the intel we need. Since Disaster Sword is hidden deep amid this chaos, it allows us to lurk around unnoticed as well, Cohen said with concern, rubbing his chin as he ambled down the street. He watched as patrons conversed about the Prince of Constellation's arrival. Here we have a champion of the poor, an officer involved in the smuggling business, a group of greedy traders, an informant, and middleman. Too bad, Prince Thales being here has heightened the restlessness in this city. These local leaders would be more guarded than usual, much more towards outsiders. It's going to be difficult for us to get information from them. We could ask the Far Easterner, Miranda said, changing the subject. Have you met our second prince? Absolutely. Cohen flushed with excitement. I witnessed how that child dealt with the 6 great dukes back in the Hall of Stars. He halted abruptly, recalling the relationship between his colleague, Miranda Arund and her father. Cohen scratched his head. Anyway, he is a fine boy. It's a good thing that the royal family found an heir. True, Miranda nodded, seemingly unaffected as she walked past a shabby tailor shop. That child left quite an impression on people, just like that time in Broken Dragon Fortress. The mental image of the dark-haired Thales Jadastar surfaced. He is probably in heroic spirit palace as we speak, negotiating with the ruler of Extit. One day, he shall be our king. Miranda frowned, clenching her right thumb and index finger. Becoming the ruler of the Northern Territory. Cohen came to know Miranda back when they were in the same cohort, so they understood each other very well. Witnessing Miranda's predicament, he sighed. It has been a crazy few days, Miranda, and I haven't gotten the chance to ask you, he said softly, are you all right? Miranda whipped her head up and glared at him. Cohen scanned their surroundings, leading Miranda behind a tavern's giant signboard. He appeared hesitant as he stammered, I heard from the old man about your father, that he and some Exedans. There's nothing much to discuss. He has to pay the price for what he did, Miranda snapped as she furrowed her eyebrows. All these years, we hardly saw each other. I don't remember much about him, so I don't see how this matter affects me. Cohen said nothing, eyeing her silently. Is that true? Raphael once told him about what Miranda went through during the bloody years. She was sent to the Tower of Eradication by her father as a child. But now. So, Cohen began, rubbing his head sheepishly and deciding to carry the conversation forward, what will happen next? I mean, I know you have lots of distant relatives who also carry your family name. If your father is stripped off his title. It's not like the kingdom has never had a duchess or a queen. Miranda's eyes flared, I am a true Arund, the sole rightful heir to the dukedom of the Northern Territory, as Thales the prince is, not even King Kessel can deny that. The burden of her family name, Cohen pursed his lips as his eyes were filled with worry. Miranda, you must know that you're not alone. For one, I'm your trusted friend. Crosh and Missadun may be Northlanders, but that does not affect our friendship. You have teacher Chartier too, and don't forget Lady Sonia at the fortress. Moreover, there's Raphael. Cohen's voice faltered, he realized he had said the wrong thing, again. Anyway, I know you are tough, with excellent swordsmanship and all, he said awkwardly. But you shouldn't have to face all of this alone. Miranda tossed him a piercing glare. All this while you've avoided mentioning Raphael's name, until now. Miranda narrowed her eyes. Cohen was startled, his heart was pounding. This girl is ridiculously perceptive. I wasn't avoiding it on purpose, I was afraid that you would be upset. After all, you grew up and trained together, but then he left without a word. Before he came up with more excuses, Miranda interrupted, he's back. He went to see you. Absolutely not, he would go to you first if he did, since you're a couple. Cohen ran a hand through his hair, laughing. Speaking of which, I felt like a ladies' man recently. Let me tell you, I met a cool lass in the capital. She was as swift as lightning with her two blades. You're just like Guru Zedai. Miranda sighed, you touch your head when you're feeling uneasy. Cohen's hand froze on his head. And then, you blabber some nonsense to change the subject, she said. He lowered his head regretfully. Cohen Carabayan, once we settle the matter at hand, we have to talk about Raphael, and everything else you are hiding from me, Miranda said sternly, holding her saber as she poked his shoulder with the sword's hilt. Cohen bared his teeth, smacking himself on the forehead. Is this what Master Shao meant by being trapped in a cocoon weaved by oneself? Let's focus on our mission for now. Do you find it strange, Cohen? Miranda uttered. First, it was the appearance of Disaster Sword, and then there's King Nuven. Looking back at the rumors flying about this city, and the assassination attempt on the Prince of Constellation's life. There's something odd about all these incidents. Huh, Cohen looked up at her, confused and still upset about their conversation earlier. Miranda tapped the hilt of her sword, pondering. The Prince of Constellation set out for Extit and he was nearly assassinated near the fortress. This incident is related to Disaster Sword, she said. Hence, the former head of the White Blade Guards, Master Shao's old acquaintance, Caslin, sent us a message. That's why we were ordered to travel here. On the other hand, the prince is currently in Dragon Cloud City, speaking to King Nuven, whom Caslin used to serve. Around the same time, Caslin found evidence of Disaster Sword's activity in the city. What a coincidence, Miranda, who was always vigilant in Cohen's eyes, said grimly. Everything is piled together. It was indeed a mess, but there appeared to be a thin thread in between all these seemingly coincidental occurrences and clues, stringing them together. Cohen was gawking at Miranda. He was not sure what she was talking about. What do you think? She asked all of a sudden. Cohen's delayed response came a second later. Oh, right, he faked a cough and thought, what Miranda's saying does make a lot of sense, I guess I just need to support her theory. I feel the same, I mean, there must be something shady going on. Cohen said, I've definitely gotten a strange vibe from what's been happening. He inhaled deeply and his gaze sharpened. With a vigilant look, he thumped his palms after each word he said. They're all part of a conspiracy. Staring at Cohen, Miranda gave a weak sigh. Her eyes were downcast as she shook her head. This idiot. He couldn't possibly know. The bearded Archduke was gnashing his teeth and staring at Thales in disbelief. The Archduke with the bowl cut took a puzzled glance at King Nuven, and then at the young prince. The bald and long-haired Archdukes exchanged glances as they knitted their eyebrows. The brunette Archduke was eyeing Thales oddly, hesitating to speak. That's it, Thales sighed in relief. He was not sure where the situation was heading. Plus, he could not confirm what King Nuven's thought of him currently, or the temperaments of these 5 Archdukes. However, a smile emerged on Thales' face as he lifted his chin, and glanced at the Archdukes. None of them dared to get their hands dirty and taint themselves with the blood of the young prince. King Kessel's oath, which protected Thales like an aegis, was still unyielding. Moments earlier, when King Nuven ordered him to kill himself, the Archdukes seemed entertained. They even had a hungry look on their faces. Of course, they would not feel the same if the honor of butchering the prince was bestowed upon them. Imagine a group of people, who happen to be up to no good. To avoid bearing the consequences, they ought to be discreet with their under-the-table plan, and fan the flames when someone else takes the blame. But no one would have dared to do it alone, in full view of everyone else. Jadistar's little bastard, a vicious glint flashed across the bearded Archduke's eyes, which were brimming with hatred towards Thales. We've heard many stories about you, cunning, manipulative, nothing a child is capable of. Looks like they are true. Enough, we are done testing the 7-year-old, the Archduke with the bowl cut said, feeling amused. Someday, this brat will be a thorn in the flesh. I bet all 6 counties in the territory of the Reformation Tower on this test. Thales frowned. No. The man with the bowl cut was interrupted shortly after. I, for one, think it is an interesting idea. King Nuven broke the silence much to the Archduke's astonishment. There was a cold gleam in his eyes. The idea of a duel. Where did you get it from? Thales slowly regained a sense of security and comfort. Adjusting his breath, he said to King Nuven, I've heard about your King Selection Congress, and the airship duel in Black Sand region. HMPH, Black Sand region. An irrepressible hint of abhorrence spread across Nuven the Seventh's face. Lampod, that bastard had the nerve to ask for ration supply and a place to station the troops that escorted you here. The Archdukes exchanged glances swiftly, and that reminded Thales of the Archduke of Black Sand region's collaborator. That two-faced, pathetic scum, said King Nuven darkly. Does he not know that he's partially responsible for what happened? The 5 Archdukes remained unmoved. The grim-faced king slammed his hand onto the table and the clash resulted in a sharp sound as his ring collided with the table's surface. Bang! Everyone in the room was startled. A duel, why not? The king turned to the Archdukes, whose faces had already paled. Who among you is willing to fight in my place to prove your loyalty to the country? Dye your hands red with his blood, and you should be able to cast aside all your worries as well as prove your allegiance to Dragon Cloud City. Thales clenched his teeth. He was starting to get King Nuven's drift. The Archduke's expressions turned sour. But the king did not give them a chance to retort. Rabian Olsius, my loyal Archduke of Prestige Orchid, he turned to the bearded man, who had been exaggeratedly hostile to Thales, and calmly said, Go, win the fight and avenge your king. Prestige Orchid, Thales remembered the place. It was where the Battle of Dawn took place 300 years ago. Lord Olsius looked at the king, then at Thales. The prince watched as his face turned grim. I assumed you were just testing him, Nuven. Lord Olsius scowled. We've discussed this. Everyone would gladly feast on the blood and flesh of Constellation, but no one wants an endless war. Do you really want to kill him right now, right here? Thales was relieved. Testing. They really were just testing him. His life was spared once again. But what followed the sense of relief was a slight confusion. From what he heard from the Archduke, these 6 men had been talking about waging war against the South. What's wrong with that? I even sent Nicholas to tie him up and parade him around the city. Nuven had a frightening, wild grin on his face. Walton is going to fall, now that I have lost my rightful heir. Can you not do one last nice gesture for Extit? The faces of the 5 Archdukes were ashen. Thales tried to put himself in their shoes. Long before this, Constellation experienced the same plight during the absence of an heir. They could not predict who their new ruler would be. Olsius, it is your sword he is holding, King Nuven said. Have you also forgotten that 600 years ago, it was Tormund Jadistar and his army who banished your family off the ancient chauvinistic territory to the north, and built Eternal Star City on your ancestral land? Killing the prince perhaps counts as an act of honor to your family. Olsius gave a laugh of mockery. Your Majesty, if you should ever declare war on the Southerners, Prestige Orchid shall stand with Dragon Cloud City and pledge allegiance to the Dragon Spear flag. Stroking his beard, the Archduke shook his head. But now, you are demanding us too. You shan't force me into this gory business. HMPH, our Honorable Lord Olsius refuses to get his hands dirty. Thales flashed a cold grin. Were all those excuses you threw at us not meant to justify your cowardice? Olsius stammered and his stare on Thales hardened. King Nuven sniggered, turning to the Archduke with the bowl cut, who was mercilessly sarcastic to the young prince earlier. How about you, Archduke of Reformation Tower, Porphyus Trendita? Kill the boy, and we shall be one. Reformation Tower, Thales thought of Lampard's story. I refuse to. Lord Trendita's response was quick. You cannot demand that from me. He shook his head warily. The Trendita family seconds the decision of warring against Constellation for one reason only, that the Reformation Tower could stand to benefit from the war. But killing this brat and having to bear the hatred of the enemy. That is a no-win bargain. If a war is started because of this, Lampard will get away with what he has done, while I take the heat. Trendita waved his hand and laughed. Great payout, minimal risk. We'll agree to send troops under these conditions. Or else, why would we get involved in this nightmare? You are the frankest person I've ever met, Trendita. The bald Archduke sighed. He continued, before King Nuvan even responded. What you just said is shamelessly selfish, but true. I cannot refute that. I, Rogers Lecco of Defense City feel the same. His bald head flashed a blinding gleam as he turned. Engaging in warfare or a killing of a child for no good reason. You all may go ahead. I, for one, do not want to bear a blood debt to Jadastar. Thales watched these men in contempt as they argued in front of their king and an outsider, just like the housewives he had seen in his past life, who gathered and gossiped whenever they bumped into each other. Thales frowned. This scene, why is it oddly familiar? All right, I've finally witnessed what Northland's dignity means, said Thales to Archduke Lecco as he eyed him with open disdain and chuckled. He then shifted his gaze to Archduke Olsius. In Northland's standard. The two archdukes did not reply and merely looked away. HMPH, if this boy is not here to apologize, we would be excused from embarrassment, would we not? King Nuvan laughed a mirthless laugh. Would you all then send your troops down south in the name of my late son? The archdukes remained silent. Thales knew the answer nevertheless. Kulgan Rockney, King Nuvan stared at the long-haired archduke and said, kill the boy, and Dragon Cloud City will vow to grant Rockney family all the benefits it can get from the war. The act of laying a hand on a child this young is a disgrace to my prominence, Lord Rockney huffed. City of Faraway Prayers is far from the menace of Constellation. Besides, my family has certain virtues they must uphold. The more Thales heard, the more he grew to be aware of the archduke's tone of voice when they spoke to the king. Through the utmost objective and direct observation, he discovered the fundamental difference between the king-vassal relationships in Exted and Constellation. In the former, archdukes and the king were both held in high regard, having similar positions and power. Some of them did not even bother to be courteous to the king, as opposed to Constellation. Thales recalled how back in the Hall of Stars, vassals of the 6 great clans and 13 distinguished families kneeled down to kiss Kessel's ring. As it seemed, the archdukes of Exted formed a regime of their own. Thales thought of Poutre's remark. They are more powerful than we can ever imagine. Their dominance of the kingdom rivals that of the king. Now, that's enough. The brown-haired man heaved a sigh. I am the suzerain of Beacon Illumination City, Concre Pafret. Your Highness, it is regretful that you have to witness all of this. He flashed Thales an apologetic smile, then said to King Nuvan with an expression of concern, your outrage is understandable, your majesty. But you must also consider the future of our kingdom. The Prince of Constellation is here, we have lost a justifiable reason to wage war. And killing him will only worsen the situation. Nuvan said nothing. He glanced at the archdukes, then at Thales as he spoke ponderously, bunch of cowards you are. Even with my approval, you are still hesitant about the war, afraid of soiling your hands with a child's blood. It was your approval that made everything about this suspicious, Thales mused. Northland does not take pride in the slaughter of children, Archduke Rockney of the City of Faraway Prayers replied coldly. Fine, then, we are done here. The grim-faced King Nuvan ended the conclave. He peeked at Thales with relentless hostility and aversion in his eyes. Put down that pathetic sword, Prince of Constellation. You will not need it for tonight's event. Ah, Thales was surprised. Tonight's event? What event? What else would it be? The King of Exted shot a chilly glare at the 5 archdukes. These cowards refused to do anything. What other choice do we have? Get ready for your welcoming banquet, Thales Jadastar. The king uttered these words with a hateful tone and left his throne. The archdukes looked at each other, standing up from their seats with strange expressions on their faces. Thales was watching them, bewildered. That's it. Hey, you, the bearded archduke of Prestige Orchid, Olsius shuffled towards Thales, glowering. When do you plan on putting down my sword? Clunk. The sword fell onto the ground from Thales' hands. His palms were numb. When he walked out of the stone hall and spotted Lord Merk who was waiting for him, he realized that he was soaked in cold sweat despite the freezing weather. It felt as though he had just finished a marathon. Thales could barely feel his legs. He clutched at his knees and exhaled deeply. Bloody Northlanders. Please come with me, your highness, Lord Merk said. I will escort you to your room to get ready for tonight's banquet. Your entourage will be there as well. Thales raised his hand. Before that, can you bring me to Lord Nicholas and Marquis Shiles? Thales smiled an eerie smile, much to Merk's intrigue. During my journey to Dragon Cloud City, the two of them have been taking good care of me. Merk hummed, feeling curious. To repay their kindness, Thales' expression was unpleasant. He lifted his chin and with determination, he said, I must express my tremendous gratitude to their families.